Jon Snow stood atop the ramparts of Winterfell, the chill wind tugging at his cloak, carrying flecks of snow and the distant echoes of memory. The courtyard below was quieter than usual, for this was not the Winterfell he had first known as a boy. Reconstruction continued in the aftermath of battle and betrayal, and under the newly minted alliance, every able-bodied man and woman had been pressed into labor. Walls that had crumbled to ruin were being rebuilt with northern timber and fresh mortar. People stirred about on daily tasks, but the usual warmth of Winterfell's bustle had not yet returned. There was an unease, an uncertainty that roamed like ghosts haunting the corridors that should have been lively with voices echoing from the hall. Jon stared over the battlements, the vast expanse of the north stretching out like a cold wilderness of secrets, and wondered if the wedding had done anything to truly quell that sense of foreboding. The marriage had been a political arrangement, admittedly a strange one. But with the threat of external forces looming, alliances had to be forged quickly. His heart panged at the idea of that vow, for no matter what, the Starks were his family in everything but blood. Even now, the revelation that he was not Ned Stark's son, but rather the child of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, was a truth too massive to digest. He could still remember the confusion and the feeling of betrayal that churned in his gut when he learned he carried Targaryen blood. The revelation had shifted the very foundation of who he believed himself to be, and the question of identity had never been so muddled. Yet politics had a way of forging fates out of necessity. Arya Stark, his sister in all the ways that counted, had been the one to suggest it, defiance gleaming in her gray eyes. The North needed leadership, unity. Winterfell needed a Stark to stand strong. And though Arya had never pictured herself as anyone's wife, she was a Stark through and through, and her sense of duty was as sharp as the steel she carried at her hip. The subtle workings of lords from the north, combined with the cunning advice of new southern allies, all converged on this singular solution. To keep Winterfell under Stark rule, to consolidate power in the north, they would wed Jon to Arya. It wasn't lost on any of them that this union was unorthodox, but the bloodlines, when the truth about Jon's parentage came to light, were not as direct a taboo as first thought. Jon was not Ned Stark's son but Arya's cousin, and though the North had historically frowned upon close-kin marriages, Targaryens had long practiced it in their lineage. Most Northerners viewed Targaryen customs with skepticism, but given the dire circumstances after the wars and the pressing need to stabilize power, grudges had softened. It was still a precarious arrangement, with some loyalists expressing disgust in hushed corners, others hailing it as a pragmatic move. Jon, for his part, wore the weight of those mixed emotions like the thick cloak on his shoulders. Now, with the wedding ceremony behind them, he gazed out over his homeland and tried to sense any difference in the land. Would the gods punish them for forging such a bond? He listened for the old gods in the wind, searching for signs. But all he felt was the cold, pressing in from the wide, white horizon. Still, he knew better than to place faith in easy omens. The old gods were silent watchers. He turned and made his way to the courtyard. Downstairs, Arya was practicing her swordsmanship. She trained with a handful of men who had volunteered to spar with her. Her moves were swift, purposeful. Every pivot of her feet was lined with the coiled intensity of a predator. She had grown tall, still lithe, but her muscles had sharpened from years of training, and her hair had lost much of its youthful softness, now cut in a practical style that brushed her shoulders. She was dressed in breeches and a tightly fitted leather jerkin, for she had never taken to the dresses that Sansa favored. Her eyes darted, fierce and calculating, as she danced around a guard whose sword arm moved with the practiced motions of an experienced soldier. Yet Arya was faster, weaving through the man's defenses and landing the blunt tip of her training sword against his chest. Jon paused to watch. He saw the flicker of triumph across her face, something that quickly faded into her usual stoicism. Her mouth tightened when she caught his eye. She dismissed the guard with a curt nod and waved the others away. Pulling her scarf up around her neck, she approached him, the toe of her boot scraping against the thin layer of ice that rimed the courtyard stones. "Jon," she said in a short greeting. Her breath came out in visible puffs. There was a complicated tension to that single syllable. It was his name, but also a reminder of their new bond. Husband, wife. These titles felt bizarre on her tongue. He saw that flicker of awkwardness in her expression. Anything new from the lords in White Harbor? John shook his head. They've pledged men. They've heard of our marriage. Davos wrote that Lord Manderley is bringing forth provisions before the next snowfall. Could be enough for the entire fortress and then some. Arya inclined her head, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. So our union is securing the north as they promised? The question hung between them, echoing all that went unspoken. The marriage was a means to an end, a vow that felt as though it were forged more out of duty than out of any sense of love or romance. John saw in Arya's gray eyes the same turmoil he felt. They were bound by a vow that was both wholly alien and painfully necessary. He offered a small nod. Yes, it seems so. The lords are uniting behind us, albeit reluctantly. This is no time for them to fight among themselves. She gave a curt laugh, though there was no humor in it. No, I suppose not. I just hope we haven't given up too much. John shrugged, the familiar pang of regret stirring in him. He understood her bitterness. Arya had dreamt of a different life, so unlike the path that had been forced upon her. She was a free spirit and a cunning survivor, shaped by journeys across the sea, shaped by hardships and secrets. And here she was, forging alliances through marriage. It was a strange twist for a girl who had once declared she would never wed, never be a lady. They started walking toward the great hall. The hush of the courtyard settled after them, and the few passing guards nodded politely but kept their gazes lowered. Everyone in Winterfell was adjusting to this new dynamic. Jon the king in the north, by acclamation, Arya the Stark bride. Behind closed doors, rumors still traveled about the scandalous nature of this union. The more pious folk wondered if the old gods would strike them down for what was, to many, a borderline incestuous arrangement. Others argued that Targaryen traditions were more flexible, that the lines of genealogical closeness had been somewhat diluted. But gossip was gossip, and it still fell heavy in the air. Inside the great hall, the banners of House Stark fluttered. Warmth from the lit hearths tried to banish the cold that seeped through the thick walls. Jon and Arya took their seats at the dais, where Sansa once sat as Lady of Winterfell. Sansa was in the south now, forging alliances of her own, ensuring that the North's presence was felt in King's Landing's newly formed court. With so many shifting loyalties since the Targaryen restoration, the realm was uneasy, and Sansa's negotiation skills were needed. Sometimes, Jon wondered if Sansa was relieved to escape the tension here, relieved to not watch her younger sister's reluctant betrothal. Across the hall, men in Stark livery, some new, some survivors of the Great War, bowed as they approached. The smell of roasted meat and spiced wine lingered, but the meal itself was subdued. With rationing still in place for the winter, feasts were rare. Jon picked at the meal, some roast venison that was just tender enough, though seasoned with more salt than spice. Arya ate sparingly as well. They both kept an ear open for the talk of the hall. A few traveling merchants with southern accents regaled the table around them with stories of improved roads and the rebuilding of holdfasts. They noted how many small folk were relocating to the north, hoping for protection and a fresh start after so many ruinous wars. One merchant, a tall fellow with a crooked grin, described an influx of orphans seeking respite in Winter Town. Another told of the uneasy peace in the Riverlands, where scattered bands of brigands still roamed. Conversation circled around the wedding too, the Stark wedding that had set tongues wagging from Dorne to the neck. They spoke carefully, with guarded words, but the curiosity was clear. Jon observed Arya as she kept a calm veneer, always watchful. As the meal concluded, they retreated to Ned Stark's old solar, which now served as their private chamber of sorts. Memories haunted that room. The scent of Ned's old cloak, the furniture that had once been meticulously polished by Catelyn. They entered, and the door closed behind them, shutting out the rest of Winterfell. Jon let the tension melt from his shoulders, though it lingered in his mind. Arya drifted to the window, arms folded across her chest. Sometimes, she began in a low voice, I feel like a stray wolf in a cage. I look around and I see home, but it doesn't feel like the home I wanted. Jon moved toward the fireplace, tossed a log on the embers, and coaxed them to life. I know the feeling, he said softly. It was never your dream to sit in Winterfell as lady. It wasn't mine to be king. She turned, eyeing him carefully. But you always had that sense of duty. You always tried to do what was right. That's what this is, isn't it? Doing what we think is right for the North. He poked at the fire, sparks crackling. I tell myself that it is. But I also wonder if it's just desperation. If we're forcing an alliance that might do more harm than good. What if our enemies use our marriage against us? This. Arya's lips curved in a small, humorless smile. They'll try. Let them. We'll meet them with steel if it comes to that. Her confidence was a reminder of how she had grown, and how far from the carefree girl he once knew. She carried a hidden darkness within her, forged by the horrors she had faced. But there was also an unbreakable resilience. Jon nodded, stepping away from the fire. The marriage had hardly changed the dynamic they shared. They spoke much the same as before, though an undercurrent of new tension buzzed in the air. Even the wedding night had been no typical consummation. They had shared wine until it felt half possible to close that gap of awkwardness, and though they had performed the formalities for the sake of the alliance, it had been something silent, almost painfully dutiful. Neither had spoken of it since. They settled into their separate corners of the room. Jon poured 2 cups of mead, offering one to Arya. She took it, and together they drank while the wind pressed against the old stones of Winterfell. A gust rattled the window, and the fire's glow flickered, painting their faces with a dancing orange hue. Outside, the storm battered the keep, swirling snow upon the ramparts and layering the courtyard in a new hush. But inside, time stretched, and they lingered in that quiet hush that only old friends, old family, could maintain without speaking. He wanted to ease the tensions. He wanted to say that everything would be fine, that they would find a way to thrive. But the words felt hollow, and the weight of the crown pressed on him as tangibly as the memory of the black cloak he had once worn as a man of the Night's Watch. Eventually, Arya drained her cup and set it aside. "I'm going to bed," she announced. "I need my rest if I'm to get up before dawn to train." Jon nodded. "I'll be here a while longer." She gave him a small nod of understanding and disappeared into the adjoining chamber, leaving the door slightly ajar. Jon sighed, finishing his own drink, his gaze trailing over the remnants of Ned Stark's legacy. Old ledgers, a map of the North pinned on a board, a sword stand in the corner. Memories lived in every stone, and sometimes they felt like ghosts whispering from the walls. He ran a hand over the map of the North, eyes tracing from Winterfell to the wall, to the Bay of Seals, and the gift. Every inch was a reminder of the land that had shaped him, even if it had not birthed him. All those years in Castle Black, believing himself a Snow, he never realized the significance of his lineage. Now, ironically, it was that lineage that had led him to marry Arya. He lingered a while longer, lost in thought before finally making his way to the bedchamber. Arya was curled on one side of the bed, her back turned. He carefully undressed down to his small clothes, slipping beneath the furs. The bed felt cold at first, but he lay still, not touching her. In the near darkness, he felt her body heat across the gap between them, smelled the faint scent of the oils she used to keep her hair from drying in the harsh winds, and it made him ache with a swirl of conflicting emotions he could barely name. He knew she was awake. Her breathing was that light, measured rhythm that gave her away. But neither of them spoke. Sleep claimed them as the night deepened, until dawn lightened the sky just enough for a new day to begin. When morning arrived, Jon rose to the sounds of activity stirring through Winterfell. The clank of steel and muffled voices signaled the daily routine resuming. Arya was already gone, her side of the bed vacant. He hastily dressed and made his way to the yard, the cold air stinging his lungs. Snow continued to drift, though lightly. He found her at the archery butts, loosing arrows into the targets with uncanny precision. The quivering shafts struck their marks in near-perfect clusters. "Good morning," he greeted, pausing a few paces behind her. She pivoted, lowering her bow. "I needed something quiet after sparring with the men," she said, stepping aside to retrieve her arrows. Her cheeks were reddened from the cold and a light sheen of sweat clung to her brow. "I'd rather keep practicing until I can't feel my fingers than sit inside and listen to more lords talk about the new era." Jon managed a faint smile. "We'll have to endure the lords either way. After the midday meal, we're expected in the hall to receive the new arrivals from the south. Some knights from House Royce, I believe, and a few others who want to see Winterfell's new union with their own eyes." Arya's face hardened, but she nodded in acknowledgement. "So be it," she said. Then she bent her bow, unstringing it with practiced efficiency. I'll be ready. They walked together back into the keep. At times, the quiet between them was comfortable, an echo of the closeness that had existed when they were younger. Other times, it felt loaded with the knowledge of what they were now. As they passed under an archway, a pair of stable hands bowed, muttering, "Your Grace, my lady." The words were still odd to Arya. She gave them the barest hint of a nod in return, stiffly acknowledging their courtesy. After breaking fast on bread, porridge, and some salted fish, they made their way to the Great Hall, where a small group of southern knights and nobles had begun to gather. Jon recognized the sigil of House Royce, a runic bronze armor plate on one man's chest. House Royce had been an old ally of the Eyrie, but so many allegiances had shifted with the changes in the realm. These men sought to align themselves with the North more firmly, now that a Targaryen ruled in King's Landing, and with the rumors swirling around the new king in the North, who was rumored to have Targaryen blood. They wanted to keep an eye on developments. Jon took his seat at the dais, Arya at his side. Her posture was stiff, her expression guarded. A hush fell over the hall as the Royce contingent approached. Lord Robar Royce was a tall man with a somber face, dressed in dark bronze armor etched with ancient runes that glinted in the torchlight. He bowed with measured respect. "Your Grace," he said, then he inclined his head toward Arya. "My lady, we come to pay our respects and to discuss matters of trade and potential alliances between our houses." Arya's gray eyes flicked over the group, weighing them as she might weigh an opponent. "Welcome to Winterfell," she said, voice restrained but polite. "We're open to hearing your proposals." And so began another session of negotiation. The talk revolved around trade routes, supply lines, and mutual defense pacts. Lord Robar spoke of opening a corridor through the Vale that could bring valuable resources to the north before the worst of winter set in. In return, he sought protection for caravans from roving brigands along the eastern roads. Arya's attention remained keen, her posture unwavering, even if formalities did not come naturally to her. Jon did most of the speaking, having learned the art of negotiation from Sansa and Davos, but Arya chipped in with sharp questions when Lord Robar's claims seemed too polished. By midday, they had reached a tentative agreement. Jon invited their guests to remain for the evening meal, which they graciously accepted. As the knights and nobles filtered out, Arya exhaled. "All these words," she muttered. "We dance around alliances with pleasantries. Meanwhile, there are threats lurking beyond the mountains, beyond the seas." Jon rubbed the back of his neck. "Diplomacy is necessary. We can't fight every threat with swords, not anymore. Not when we're this vulnerable after the wars." She was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I know. Doesn't mean I have to like it." Nay. Later, as the sun slipped toward the western horizon, they found themselves on the training grounds once more. Many of the southern knights who had arrived were watching the northern soldiers practice. Arya, ever one to test her skills, had decided to spar with a Royce soldier who boasted of his prowess. She moved with lethal grace, parrying his strikes with ease. The clash of steel on steel drew attention, but few dared to comment on how the new Lady of Winterfell handled her sword better than most men. Jon observed from the sidelines, arms folded. The cold wind whipped at his cloak, but he scarcely felt it. He couldn't help but marvel at Arya's skill. In a few strokes she disarmed her opponent, leaving the soldier blinking in astonishment. A few onlookers exchanged murmurs of surprise. The hush broke as Arya extended a hand to help the man up, and they parted without ceremony. One of the Vale Knights approached Jon, bowing respectfully. "Your Grace, I have never seen a lady fight like that." Jon recognized a hint of disapproval or bewilderment in the knight's tone, but he kept his own voice level. "My lady wife grew up in a time of war. She's as skilled as any warrior here." The knight swallowed, eyes flitting to Arya, who was heading toward them. "Indeed, that is clear." Arya joined them, brushing a lock of hair from her eyes. She gave the knight a brief, appraising look. "I can recommend a few pointers for your man if he wants," she said, voice neutral. Then she addressed Jon. "I need to prepare for the evening's meal, unless you require something else." Jon shook his head. "Go ahead. I'll follow soon." She slipped away, leaving Jon to handle the lingering curiosity of the Southerners. He sensed their unease. Perhaps it was a mixture of respect and something like fear. Arya Stark was not the image of a lady they were accustomed to, and rumors of her past travels and rumored kills lingered like a shadow. Yet it also served a purpose. If the Vale's knights realized just how formidable the Lady of Winterfell was, they might think twice about any deception. Jon turned to the knight, offering a polite half-smile. "You'll be served hearty fare tonight," he said. "Roast boar, I believe. Lord Robar will see that you're seated near the hearth. It's warm there." The knight, perhaps relieved to shift from talk of swords to something more pleasant, bowed again. "Thank you, your grace." Jon left him and headed for the great keep, footsteps echoing in the corridor. As he traversed the familiar halls, he caught glimpses of how life had begun to return to Winterfell. Candles were lit, tapestries were being repaired or replaced, and the smell of fresh bread and broth wafted from the kitchens. It was not the bustling stronghold of his boyhood, but each day it grew a little closer. He made his way to the bedchamber he now shared with Arya. He found her there peeling off her training leathers, hair slightly disheveled. She cast him a sidelong glance. "So many stairs," she murmured. "I could feel them when I was fighting." "It doesn't matter," Jon said quietly. "They'll learn to accept it. You're as much Lady of Winterfell as Sansa ever was, even if you go about it differently." Arya gave a short laugh, her eyes distant. "I doubt the Southerners will ever see me as a proper lady. But that's fine. I'd rather be underestimated than forced into a mold." "No." He walked to the wooden table in the corner, poured some water into a basin, and began washing his face and hands. The water was cold enough to make him grimace. "Your skill with the blade is an asset, especially in these times," he said. "More than ever, we need people who can protect Winterfell." She sighed, undoing the leather bracers at her wrists. "Do you think all this political posturing will be worth it in the end? We marry, we host these people, we bow and scrape to keep alliances intact. Part of me wonders if we should have just hunkered down and let the North remain the North." "No, seriously." Jon toweled off, considering her question. "I asked myself the same, but the wars taught me that isolation can be a weakness. We tried to stand alone against the threat of the White Walkers, and it nearly destroyed us. And now, with Cersei gone and the Iron Throne reoccupied by another Targaryen branch, the realm shifts constantly. We can't afford to hide." Arya nodded, but her expression was still clouded. They dressed for the evening meal in the simplest attire that could still be called formal. Jon donned a dark gray tunic with a stark sigil, belted with leather the color of charcoal. Arya opted for a long tunic of deep forest green, cinched at the waist, over breeches and boots, a compromise between her desire for practicality and the court's expectations. They walked side by side to the great hall, and even with the hush of winter enveloping Winterfell, the hall was lit with torches and bustling with conversation. Lords, ladies, knights, and their retinues mingled among the benches. Servants hurried about with trays of food. The aroma of spiced boar and root vegetables perfumed the air. Jon and Arya took their places at the high table, flanked by northern lords on one side and the visiting Vale contingent on the other. Lord Robar Royce stood to deliver a toast. "To the king in the north," he said, raising his cup, "and to Lady Arya, the strength of Winterfell. May our alliance bring prosperity to our people." The crowd joined in, voices echoing. Arya shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the attention, but she raised her cup as well. Through the meal, conversation flowed. Jon directed discussions toward the rebuilding of roads, the distribution of supplies, and how best to patrol the stretches between the north and the Vale. Arya contributed now and again, her words measured. The knights and lords, somewhat awed by her earlier display of martial prowess, listened respectfully. After the feast concluded, musicians began to play soft tunes in a corner of the hall. A few couples ventured to dance, northern dances more subdued than southern reels. Jon observed them with a faint nostalgia, remembering the feasts of old, how Robb or Theon might tease him, how Sansa would sometimes be coaxed to dance. He felt Arya beside him, her posture rigid. "Do you want to dance?" he asked quietly, leaning toward her so only she could hear. She shot him a look that bordered on incredulous. "May?" she said. "I don't dance." "Neither do I," Jon admitted, a mirthless smile tugging at his lips. "But they might expect it, if only to show some semblance of tradition. We are newlywed, after all." She let out a soft, resigned chuckle. "All right. One dance." Rising from the chair, she took his hand, her grip firm. They stepped down from the dais, a ripple of surprise coursing through the hall as people noticed the king in the north and his lady preparing to dance. The music was gentle, the strings and pipes echoing off the stone walls. John placed a hand lightly at Arya's waist. She rested hers on his shoulder. They began moving in a modest, measured pattern. It was clear both of them were novices, and yet there was a strange rhythm to their motions. It wasn't a graceful display of romance as some might expect of newlyweds. Instead, it was more like two reluctant participants fulfilling a public duty. Still, for a few moments, there was an odd sense of calm. The hall blurred around them, and the music guided them through steps that were both foreign and reminiscent of days gone by, days before war and secrets. Arya's gaze flicked over his shoulder, scanning the crowd. "They're all watching," she murmured. Joan's lips formed a grim line. "They expect this, I suppose." She exhaled slowly. "At least it'll be over soon." When the tune ended, polite applause scattered through the hall. Arya and John retreated to their seats. He noticed a few of the southern visitors looked disappointed that there wasn't more romance or at least a more grandiose performance. But it couldn't be helped. He was just as relieved as Arya to be done with it. As the evening wore on, lords and knights trickled out of the hall, some to their chambers, others to the warm fires in side rooms, where they might continue their discussions. Eventually, John and Arya left as well, returning to their shared solar. The fire in the hearth had been stoked by servants, illuminating the space with a soft glow. John shrugged off his cloak, tossing it over a chair. Arya unfastened the belt at her waist, her movements terse. She spoke first, a wry edge to her voice. "That was awkward." John gave a short nod. "Hey, but we did what was expected." Arya lowered herself onto a bench by the fire, gazing into the flames. "All my life, I wanted to be free of the expectations people put on me. But now?" She trailed off, letting the thought finish itself in the crackle of the fire. John sat across from her. Silence yawned between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. At length, Arya looked up. Her eyes were sharp, but he also glimpsed weariness in them. "It feels like the realm wants to put 100 burdens on our shoulders. And here we are, trying to hold up Winterfell, trying to keep the North safe. I never wanted any of this. Did you?" He shook his head, swallowing. "No, I wanted it. Once, I wanted a place where I belonged. I joined the Night's Watch because it gave me purpose. Then I found out my entire identity was a lie. And now the weight of 2 houses sits on my shoulders. Sometimes I feel like I can't breathe." Arya studied him, then slowly rose. She crossed the gap and stood close. "Maybe we can find our own way," she said quietly. "All this talk of duty, it can't be the only thing that defines us." He looked up at her, tension knotting in his chest. He wanted that to be true. He wanted to believe there was a path forward that wasn't riddled with impossible expectations. Slowly he stood as well, and they stood face to face. The flicker of the fire cast dancing shadows across Arya's features, giving her an almost haunted look. Her eyes held a mixture of determination and fear. She took a breath, opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again. The silence buzzed. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling just a note. "I'm tired, John." He reached for her hand, gently clasping it. "Me too," he admitted. They parted soon after, each heading to their side of the bed, drawn together yet separate. That was how it was, this strange dance they performed. They were bound by a contract, a vow. Yet their hearts and minds wove a more complicated pattern, one that neither fully understood how to navigate. The nights continued to pass in a blur of formalities, strategies, training, and meager festivities. Winter tightened its hold on the land. Snow piled in the courtyard, icicles hung from the eaves, and the breath of the north howled through the corridors. The great hall, though warmed by blazing hearths, still felt drafty. Guests rotated in and out, from lords of the far-flung corners of the north to envoys from King's Landing and the Vale. Every day brought new complexities of leadership. Petitions from small folk, disputes between lesser lords, the distribution of food stores, and the forging of agreements. Arya spent her mornings in training sessions, honing her archery and swordsmanship, sometimes drilling with the garrison to maintain readiness. John often joined her, though more frequently, he was required in council meetings. He met with the stewards, the masters of horse, and the keep's quartermasters to ensure that Winterfell could sustain itself through the long winter. Arya would appear intermittently, clad in her practical leathers, face flushed from exertion, to offer her own insight into the fortress's security. Her presence was both reassuring and disconcerting to the men who were not used to seeing a woman in the midst of such discussions. But after a few sharp remarks from her, and after witnessing her skill, none dared to challenge her right to be there. The dynamic between them was functional and polite. Occasionally they even shared a light moment or two, Arya teasing Jon about his knack for brooding, Jon remarking on her quick wit. But the tension of their new roles pressed in from all sides, and the rumor mills never ceased. Whispers circulated about the nature of their marriage, about whether it was truly consummated, about the possibility of heirs. This last point was one that made Arya bristle whenever it arose. The realm expected them to produce children, wolves with a hint of dragon's blood. But the practicalities of that, given their unique circumstances, were a subject neither was eager to broach. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of negotiations with a delegation from the Riverlands, farmers looking for aid to rebuild after the devastation they'd endured, Jon slipped away to the godswood. The heart tree stood tall, its white bark stark against the snow. Red leaves rustled in the breeze, and its face, carved long ago, watched with patient, eternal calm. The hot springs bubbled in the distance, faintly steaming. Jon knelt by the roots, breathing in the silence. Snowflakes drifted, settling on his cloak. He thought of his father, and Stark, and wondered what he would think of this marriage. Ned had always been a man of principle, guiding his children with an unwavering moral compass. Jon hoped that wherever Ned's spirit resided, he would see that this was done for the good of the North. He closed his eyes, letting the hush of the old gods fill his mind. Footsteps crunched in the snow behind him. He turned to see Arya approaching. She offered a faint smile, then knelt beside him. "I figured you'd be here," she said softly. "You always came here when you were troubled. I remember." He nodded, turning his gaze back to the heart tree. "It's peaceful," he said. "But sometimes I come here for answers I can't seem to find anywhere else. And yet, the old gods don't speak." Arya's breath curled in the cold air. "I don't think the old gods speak in words. More like feelings, maybe. I don't know. Sometimes I think I can hear them in the wind and the leaves." They fell silent for a moment, simply breathing in the stillness. Then Arya spoke again. "We need to talk about what everyone's been whispering. About heirs." Jon pressed his lips together, his chest tightening. "I know. It's not that I'm afraid," Arya said, her voice level. "But how do we do this? We were never meant to be." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, stopping the flow of words. "I know," he repeated quietly. "This entire situation is strange, but it is our reality now. The realm will expect it. But that doesn't mean we have to rush. We're only just beginning to rebuild. People's minds are full of gossip, but the North has bigger worries. Food, security, alliances." Arya searched his face in the dim light. "So we put it off." Jon hesitated, unsure. "We can't avoid it forever. If we don't produce an heir, some might see it as a weakness. The line of succession becomes precarious. And if the realm senses that precariousness, we might find ourselves with enemies at the gates." Arya let out a slow breath, eyes flicking away. "I never wanted children. I never imagined it. Not because I dislike the idea of a family, but because my life has always been about survival, about forging my own path. Children. That path is so different." Jon gave a short nod, empathy filling him. He too had never imagined himself a father. He had been a bastard, a brother of the Night's Watch, a warrior in wars he could barely comprehend. Parenthood hadn't factored into those roles. "We'll face it together," he offered. "Whatever decision we make, it'll be ours." She let a hand trail through the snow at the base of the heart tree. "Yes," she said softly, echoing his vow. "We face it together." They stayed there for a time, kneeling in the snow, forging a silent pact in the presence of the old gods. A fragile sense of unity lingered between them, one that might grow stronger if they nurtured it, or wither if they allowed the weight of duty and expectation to crush it. The following weeks were a churn of daily tasks, yet subtle changes took root. Arya and Jon found small moments of camaraderie, discussing strategies late at night, laughing quietly when a hapless southern squire nearly froze his toes off because he refused to wear thick boots. They still slept with a gulf of space between them, but the tension was less fraught. They realized that in order to make this marriage work, they had to communicate. So they did, in small ways, forging a new sort of partnership. Winterfell itself felt that shift. The people saw Jon and Arya regularly riding out together to inspect the outer villages. They watched the king in the north consult his lady on matters of defense. They saw her in the courtyard training side by side with him. And slowly, uncertainly, they accepted it. Rumors still lingered about the nature of their bond, but the realm was used to strange alliances by now. The fiascos of the previous decades had inured them to many things. One morning, news arrived from King's Landing. A royal raven brought word from the current occupant of the Iron Throne, a Targaryen cousin who had emerged in the aftermath of Daenerys' downfall. This new king, Aenys Targaryen, had been crowned under suspicious circumstances, though the realm had been too exhausted from war to oppose him en masse. Aenys summoned Jon to attend a council in King's Landing, to discuss boundaries and tribute, to re-establish the North's place in the Seven Kingdoms now that the Targaryen line was back on the throne. Jon read the parchment in the solar, Arya looking over his shoulder. "He wants to meet with us," she said, lips twisting. "He probably wants to see with his own eyes what sort of monster or saint you are, given your heritage." Jon grunted. "Likely. He also wants to ensure we bend the knee properly, pay the crown's due. The Targaryens historically never let the North rule itself unchallenged." Arya straightened, crossing her arms. "We'll have to go. If we don't, it'll be seen as an insult or a challenge." He nodded, folding the parchment. "We'll make arrangements, but I won't go alone. I'll bring a retinue of trusted men, and you." The corner of Arya's mouth turned up slightly. "I'd go anyway. I've had enough of letting you face these vipers alone." So plans were set in motion. Ravens flew to all corners of the north to ensure the lords remained vigilant. Lords like the Manderleys, the Umbers, and the Glovers would keep watch over Winterfell in Jon's absence. Supplies were packed, horses readied, and a small contingent of loyal guards assembled. Traveling south in winter was never an easy feat, but the roads had been cleared as much as possible, and roving bandits were fewer thanks to the newly bolstered northern patrols. On the morning of departure, Jon and Arya stood by the main gates of Winterfell. A light snow fell, gathering in the horses' manes and dusting armor. The gates groaned open, and the retinue began their journey. As they passed the outer walls, Jon glanced back at the sturdy towers of Winterfell, a protective fortress nestled in the snowy landscape, smoke rising from the chimneys. The scent of pine and frost lingered in the cold air. Arya rode at his side, wearing a thick gray cloak embroidered subtly with the Stark direwolf. Needle was at her hip, and a short blade was strapped to her horse's saddle. She wasn't about to leave her defense to chance, nor would Jon allow it. Ghost, Jon's direwolf, loped alongside them, a silent sentinel. The presence of that great white wolf was both comforting and foreboding to the men who rode behind. They set their course south, crossing the winter-laden moors and forests that encircled Winterfell. Their pace was measured. They would reach Moat Cailin in several days, that ancient stronghold at the neck that often served as the gateway to the north. Beyond it, the climate would begin to soften, the snow thinning into the muddy roads of the Riverlands, eventually leading them to the Crownlands and the capital. As they rode, Jon and Arya stayed close, exchanging few words but many glances. A silent understanding passed between them. This journey to King's Landing would be fraught with political intricacies, old enemies, and new alliances. They had to stand united. If their marriage was a symbol for the North, it would need to be displayed in full force at court. The journey was long, and though the nights brought cold campfires, it also brought them a sense of solitude away from the watchful eyes of the court. Huddled together in a large tent, they navigated the small intimacies of shared living. Arya would unlace her boots, and Jon would quietly prepare a simple meal from the provisions pack. Ghost would rest at the tent's entrance, occasionally lifting his head when he heard distant noises in the brush. On the third night, as they lay with bedrolls near the tent's brazier, Arya turned to Jon. Do you think the new king has any real claim? Or is he just a figurehead propped up by opportunists? Jon, half lost in thought, sighed. Hard to say. The realm was shattered after the wars, and Daenerys' departure left a power vacuum. This Aenys is some distant cousin who seized the moment. He may have Targaryen blood, but that alone doesn't ensure loyalty. 1-0. Arya grunted in agreement. We'll have to keep our guard up. King's Landing is full of snakes. Jon's gaze swept over her, half illuminated by the flicker of firelight. Yes, but we have a few allies there. Tyrion, Brienne, if she's still around. And Sansa, if she's returned from her travels. I'm not certain where she's taken up residence, though her letters mention visits to Highgarden. Arya's tone turned softer at the mention of Sansa. I hope she's well. I miss her more than I'd like to admit. Jon nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. Sansa has her own ways of survival. She's cunning in that political arena. She thrived as the Lady of Winterfell and learned the games of the South the hard way. A comfortable silence settled between them for a moment, and then Arya adjusted her blankets. I suppose we'll see soon enough. Just watch your back, Jon. The Targaryens have a habit of betraying their own kin as much as they do their enemies. He glanced at Ghost's silhouette by the tent flap. I'll watch yours if you watch mine. She nodded, her eyes drifting closed, the weariness of the journey claiming her. Jon lay back and stared at the canvas ceiling of the tent, listening to the wind outside. He wondered what fate awaited them in King's Landing, and how their precarious marriage would be tested in the heart of Southern power. The next days passed in a repetition of hooves clopping over hardened roads, brief stops at inns or holdfasts for rest, and the unstoppable progression southward. Moat Cailin loomed, its ancient towers in partial ruin, a reminder of the centuries-long struggle between the north and the south. They passed under the shadows of those towers, paying respects to the men left to guard the crossing. The journey continued, the land slowly changing, the air growing less biting. Snow turned to a cold drizzle, then to bouts of pale sunlight peeking through gray clouds. They encountered the usual travelers, merchants hauling goods, small folk migrating in search of farmland, soldiers escorting petty lords. Sometimes Jon would see the war-weary expressions of men scarred by the recent conflicts, but occasionally they saw signs of hope, fields being sown again, new houses rising where old ones had been burned. On the outskirts of the riverlands, they set up camp near a shallow stream. Ghost wandered the perimeter, sniffing the air warily. Arya scouted ahead, her keen eyes searching for any threats. Jon busied himself conferring with the men, ensuring the horses were tended and that their provisions remained sufficient. That night, as they sat around a modest campfire, one of Jon's guards, a young man named Desmond, spoke of rumors had heard in taverns along the way. They say the new king is looking to marry off his sister to some lord from the Reach, bolster his claim by tying himself to the great houses. Some mention also that he wants to keep an eye on you, your grace. Jon let the words settle. No surprise there. He might see me as a rival, especially if he believes the rumors about my parentage. Desmond nodded solemnly. They say the small folk call you the White Wolf, a Targaryen in the north. They wonder if you might someday stake a claim to the Iron Throne. No. Arya let out a huff. As if we don't have enough headaches. Jon threw her a sardonic look. Indeed, the last thing I want is that throne. Desmond's gaze flicked between them. But these rumors spread, my lady. You should both be aware that the capital might view you as more than just the king in the north. Jon thanked Desmond and dismissed the guard. When it was just him and Arya, she stared into the flickering flames. This is exactly why we can't go in blind, she said. The court will poke and prod, trying to find weaknesses. They'll question our marriage, our alliances. We have to be ready. Jon studied the firelight dancing in her eyes. We will be, he said. We have each other's backs. That's more than most in the capital have. The next morning, they continued south, crossing the Trident at one of the newly rebuilt bridges. The riverlands showed signs of reconstruction, fields churned up, burned-out villages slowly being reclaimed, or in some places left as skeletal reminders of the war. Jon felt a pang of sorrow. So much of the land still bore scars that might take generations to heal. Finally, after long days on the road, the outline of King's Landing appeared on the horizon, a sprawling city of mismatched roofs and towers, its walls winding like a great stone serpent. Above it all rose the Red Keep, perched on Egan's high hill. They neared the city gates, and the smell hit them first, familiar to anyone who had been to the capital. A pungent mix of too many people, refuse, smoke, and the tang of the Blackwater Bay. Traffic thickened near the gates, but the presence of armed northern guards and the imposing figure of Ghost cleared a path. Curious eyes followed them, whispering about the king in the north and the famed assassin lady at his side. They were met by a cadre of city guards, who led them up winding streets to the Red Keep. The fortress loomed overhead, red walls washed pale in the winter sunlight. Once inside the courtyard, they were greeted by a steward of the king, who bowed with courtly politeness and offered them rooms in the keep proper. Servants hurried to stable their horses, and Ghost prowled warily at John's side, ignoring the startled gasps of bystanders. As John and Arya dismounted, they shared a look. Here they were, in the very heart of southern power, the seat of Targaryen rule. The steward prattled on, explaining that King Aenys awaited their audience in the throne room the next day. They were given separate chambers, but close by in the same corridor, as was customary for high-born couples. Their retinue was housed in nearby apartments, ensuring they'd have their guard close at hand. Before they parted ways to rest, Arya touched Joan's arm. "Stay vigilant," she said, voice low. "This place has a habit of devouring wolves." He gave a tight nod. "I won't forget." That night, each of them settled into the unfamiliar comfort of the Red Keep's guest quarters. The walls were hung with faded tapestries depicting old Targaryen conquests, dragons and flames, battles and kings. John found it unnerving, a history that he was unwittingly tied to. He tried to sleep, but rest eluded him. He thought of the morrow, of the forthcoming meeting with King Aenys, of the hungry eyes of courtiers who would dissect every gesture he made. Similarly, Arya paced her chamber, restless. She finally lay down on the bed, letting her eyes close. Memories drifted through her mind. The last time she was in this city, it had been under far different circumstances. She had been younger, lost in a swirl of tragedy. Now, she returned as Lady of Winterfell. The irony was not lost on her. Dawn broke over the city in a wash of pale light. Trumpets sounded from distant towers, signaling the start of a new day. John and Arya dressed for court in their northern finery. Arya wore a dark gray tunic embroidered with the Stark direwolf, long sleeves lined with wolf fur at the cuffs. John donned a similarly hued outfit, practical yet stately, with subtle touches of black leather. Ghosts remained behind under guard, as animals were typically not allowed in the throne room, except by the king's express permission, though John felt uneasy leaving his direwolf's protection. They were escorted through twisting corridors to the throne room. The grand space opened before them, with towering columns and colored windows that cast shards of light onto the floor. The Iron Throne stood at the far end, a mass of twisted swords fused by dragonfire, though it looked a bit different than John remembered, as the new king had apparently refurbished it to suit his tastes, polishing certain segments and adorning it with velvet drapes at its base. King Aenys Targaryen was perched upon it, a man in his early 30s, pale hair brushed back, violet eyes that surveyed the hall with a mix of curiosity and caution. He wore a crown of rubies and black steel, and his robes were black and red, the Targaryen colors. Courtiers lined the sides of the hall, faces half hidden in the shadows, their whispers swirling. John and Arya approached in measured steps, stopping at a respectful distance. They bowed, a brief inclination of the head that was all tradition required of a king in the north acknowledging the Iron Throne. Aenys leaned forward, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "King Jon Snow," he said, his voice a cool tenor that carried across the hall, "and Lady Arya of House Stark. Welcome to King's Landing?" "No horror." Jon straightened. "Thank you for receiving us, Your Grace." Aenys shifted on the throne, his pale fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. "We have heard many tales of your valor, King Jon. The defeat of the Night King, the wars you fought, and your union with your lady. Quite the alliance, I must say. We Targaryens appreciate the importance of bloodlines, do we not?" Arya's gaze flicked up, scanning the watchers. She saw lords, ladies, knights, all leaning in to catch every word. The tension in the room was palpable. She spoke tersely. "We appreciate the courtesy you show in hosting us." The king's smile didn't falter. "Of course. We have much to discuss regarding the North's place in the realm. Tribute, mutual defense, trade agreements. But let us not dwell on such matters right this moment." He gestured expansively, the sleeves of his robes shifting with the motion. "Tonight, a feast will be held in your honor. We shall talk then." John inclined his head. "We look forward to it, Your Grace." Ennis waved a hand. "My steward will see you attended. For now, consider yourselves free to explore the city, or rest as you will. We shall speak more soon." Wow. With that, the formal audience concluded. Courtiers whispered behind raised hands as John and Arya turned and walked out, escorted by the steward. Once outside the throne room, John let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Arya's lips thinned. "He's trying to be gracious," she murmured, "but I can smell suspicion in the air." John gave a small nod, eyes narrowed. "Yes. He wants to gauge our strength. We'll have to be cautious." "Oh, why?" They were guided to an antechamber where refreshments were laid out. After dismissing the steward, they exchanged a glance. That first audience had been fleeting, but it revealed the challenges ahead. Ennis was cordial, but there was a calculating gleam in his eyes. They were in the heart of Targaryen power, with watchers on all sides eager to glean secrets. They had only each other to rely on. John reached for Arya's hand, a rare public display of closeness, and she let him. It was not an act of romance so much as unity, a reminder that they faced this together. And so the next chapter of their marriage and their rule began, in the lion's den of King's Landing, with the fate of the North hanging in the balance. They spent what remained of the day behind closed doors, resting, preparing, and conferring with the few trusted members of their guard who had accompanied them. A hush seemed to linger in the Red Keep's corridors, as though the castle itself were a watchful guardian, or a coiled serpent, monitoring their every move. The thick walls and heavy tapestries offered privacy only in the most superficial sense, and both John and Arya were keenly aware that courtiers, servants, and spies alike might lurk just beyond earshot. John paced his borrowed chamber, the wide windows overlooking the sprawling rooftops of King's Landing. The city spread out below, a chaotic patchwork under the pale winter sun. He had removed his heavy cloak and wore a simpler, dark tunic. Thoughts churned behind his gray eyes. The courtesy King Ennis had displayed could be a genuine attempt at diplomacy, or a carefully crafted ploy to test the North's submission. After all, Targaryens had a long history of using feasts, marriages, and alliances as veils for deeper political machinations. And John carried Targaryen blood, though he had never asked for that legacy, nor did he relish it. He felt an unsettled weight on his shoulders. He could almost hear the rumors swirling among the courtiers. The bastard turned king, the wolf with dragon's blood, the man who had wed his own cousin, though no one openly uttered that taboo phrase, not yet. His marriage to Arya, though accepted by much of the North, was bound to attract scrutiny in the South. Most Southerners cared little that his Targaryen blood made him only a distant cousin to her in truth. They would see a Stark wedding a man who had been raised as her brother, and they would wonder at the moral or political cunning behind it. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Arya enter. She shut the heavy door behind her, then scanned the room in that quick, efficient way of hers, as though seeking hidden threats. Only once she seemed certain they were alone did she exhale. "They're preparing the feast," she said. "One of the servants came by my chamber. Apparently we're to make an entrance when the sun dips behind the city walls. Some nonsense about formalities." John allowed himself a small, humorless smile. "So, they want spectacle. I suppose King's Landing thrives on spectacle? Any sense of the court's mood?" Arya shrugged. She wore a fitted black jerkin over a dark gray undertunic, breeches beneath, and soft leather boots. It wasn't exactly the fashion of the South, but she had compromised by letting her hair be loosely arranged at the back, a half-hearted gesture toward a more ladylike appearance. I passed a few courtiers in the corridor, men and women wearing Targaryen red and black, some in the colors of smaller crownlands houses. They bowed politely enough, but their eyes were full of questions. She paused, her gaze sliding to the window. "This is a viper's nest. You can feel it, can't you?" "Naniwar?" He nodded, glancing at the swirling city beyond the glass. "I can. We'll have to tread carefully." His voice lowered. "We'll meet King Ennis, see how he carries himself in private. The public show of a feast is one thing. His real intentions might only become clear afterward. He may want us firmly under his thumb, or he may try to coerce some kind of oath beyond what we're prepared to give. Arya's mouth hardened. We've sworn nothing but to remain the North's protectors. If he thinks we'll bend to every whim of the crown, he's mistaken. Nah. Jon crossed the room, picking up a small wooden box that had arrived earlier. Inside, he found a silver cloak clasp fashioned in the shape of the Stark direwolf. He pinned it to his tunic, then glanced at Arya. And that's exactly why we must maneuver with caution, not hostility. We can't afford open conflict. Our people are still rebuilding. Arya inclined her head, conceding the point. I know. But that doesn't mean we let him walk over us. Now, they shared a brief, taut silence, both acutely aware that the future of the North might hinge on the negotiations here. Then Arya stepped closer. She touched Jon's arm, her voice dropping. We'll handle it together. That's the only way this works. He placed a hand over hers. Yes, together. When they emerged into the corridor later, 2 castle servants awaited them, a young man in red and gold livery, and a woman whose garb signified she worked in the royal household. They bowed as one, then guided Jon and Arya through the winding halls toward the Great Hall. Along the way, they passed windows that framed the city in the rose-gold light of late afternoon. The servants moved with mechanical precision, stopping at intervals to let pairs of gold cloaks open heavy doors or stand aside. Finally, they reached a pair of massive oak doors, newly polished, that led to the banquet chamber. The servants bowed and gestured for them to enter. Inside, the hall was ablaze with torchlight and candles. The air smelled of roasting meats, fresh bread, spiced wine, and sweet pastries. Long tables ran the length of the room, already half filled with high-born guests, lesser courtiers, knights, and favored merchants. At the far end was the dais where the king and his family would sit, along with a few honored guests. Jon felt multiple sets of eyes settle on him the moment he crossed the threshold. The chamber quieted as King Aenys rose from his seat. He was flanked by 2 figures. On his right, a woman of about 20, also silver-haired, her features bearing the classic Targaryen cast. She wore a gown of dark red velvet and carried herself with a certain haughty poise. On his left, a tall man with the look of a Kingsguard knight, white cloak draped over polished plate. Jon did not recognize the man's face but noted the calm, penetrating gaze he turned on them. Aenys extended his hands in a welcoming gesture. Behold the king in the north, Jon Snow, and his lady Arya Stark, he announced. His voice carried well in the hall, reverberating off stone walls. The crowd of guests rose to acknowledge the newcomers, many bowing or curtsying. Arya's posture was stiff, her jaw set as she scanned the gazes arrayed before her. Jon inclined his head, letting protocol guide him for the moment. They advanced toward the dais. A steward guided them to seats not far from the king, facing the gathered throng. To Arya's relief, there was no immediate call for dancing or ceremonial toasts. Apparently that would come later. Servants rushed forward, filling their cups with wine, presenting platters of food. Jon tasted the wine, sweet, with a hint of spice, while Arya took only a token sip, her eyes already flicking around to note who was present. King Aenys resumed his seat, letting the crowd settle. He lifted a silver goblet. To the north, and to renewed bonds between our kingdoms, he proclaimed. The guests echoed the toast. Jon raised his own cup as well, and Arya mirrored him, though her expression remained neutral. As they began to eat, Aenys leaned toward Jon, lowering his voice so only Jon, Arya, and the silver-haired woman on his right could hear. I trust the Red Keep has made you comfortable. Jon nodded. We have no complaints, Your Grace. Thank you for the hospitality. The woman at Aenys' side spoke next, her voice carrying the soft lilt of the Targaryen lineage. I am Princess Rhaella, she said. It is an honor to meet you, King Jon. We have heard much of your bravery, battles against the dead, the reclaiming of Winterfell, and your union to secure the North. Arya felt a prickle at the phrase, union to secure the North, but she kept her tone polite. The dead nearly overwhelmed us all. Without the combined effort of many, we would not be here now. Ooh. Rhaella offered a thin smile, more politeness than warmth. Indeed, the realm owes you a great debt. My father used to say the North was the bulwark of Westeros, protecting us from terrors beyond the wall. Jon regarded her carefully. He'd never heard of this princess before, Aenys had seemingly sprung into power from some obscure branch of the Targaryen family. The entire lineage was complicated, especially after years of purges, rebellions, and dragons going extinct, then returning, then dying again. "Your father must have been a wise man," Jon said, non-committal. Aenys toyed with a piece of bread, then asked, "Will you remain in the capital long, King Jon? I imagine your duties in Winterfell press you to return." Jon offered a measured reply. "Will remain as long as is needed to settle matters with the crown, your grace." "Excellent," Aenys said. "We shall schedule a council session in the coming days to finalize certain arrangements, tribute, trade, lines of defense. Let it not be said that House Targaryen neglected the well-being of our northern subjects." His gaze flicked meaningfully between Jon and Arya. "It is good to see the Starks represented here. I recall, as a boy, hearing tales of your father, Ned Stark, and how he served in King's Landing for a time." A faint smirk danced on the king's lips, as though recalling the fate that had befallen Ned. "Let us hope your own service is more fortuitous." Arya's hand tightened on her goblet. She could almost sense the memory of Ned Stark's death in the air, an unspoken weight. She forced a level tone. "We are not here to serve in any capacity beyond forging peaceful relations. My father's fate is a reminder of how precarious the crown's hospitality can be." A murmur rippled through those close enough to hear. Aenys let out a soft laugh, setting down his bread. "Well," said my lady, "yet I assure you King's Landing is a more stable place now. We have no appetite for further bloodshed. The realm has bled enough. Perhaps we have that in common." His violet eyes lingered on Jon's face a beat too long. Then he returned his attention to the assembled guests. "Now, let us not sour the feast with talk of old tragedies. Eat, drink, and make merry." Music started up from a gallery above, and servants moved briskly, passing around plates heaped with honey-glazed quail, roasted vegetables, and fresh-baked loaves. As the feast proceeded, Jon and Arya engaged in the subtle dance of conversation with nearby lords and ladies who angled to gain their favor. A few expressed curiosity about the North's progress in rebuilding. Others asked discreetly about the rumors of how Jon had come to be crowned king in the North. Arya fielded the more invasive questions with curt, pointed remarks that left some would-be flatterers blinking in surprise. Eventually, a series of performers took the central floor. Jugglers, minstrels, and a small troupe of actors who performed a brief comedic scene about a southern fop who ventured north and got lost in a blizzard. The humor was broad, and it coaxed polite laughter from the crowd, though Arya's face remained impassive. She occasionally glanced at Jon, noting the mild tension in his jaw. At length, Princess Rhaella rose to lead a more refined dance, inviting various lords to partner with ladies from among the assembled nobility. She swept over, smiled sweetly at Jon, and said, "Might I request the honor of a dance, King in the North? It would please my brother greatly." Jon hesitated. He was not fond of dancing, nor was he eager to play the puppet in these courtly games, but refusing outright could be seen as an insult. He rose, bowing slightly. "Of course, Princess." Arya watched as Rhaella guided Jon to the open space. The minstrels struck up a stately tune. The princess danced gracefully, twirling in a swirl of crimson skirts. Jon moved with the measured caution of a man acutely aware that many eyes were upon him. Arya could almost feel the undercurrent. Rhaella wanted to pry secrets out of Jon, or test him, or perhaps simply display her own standing in front of the entire court. Arya's mood soured at the sight. Not out of jealousy. She had never been one to bristle over romantic trifles, but because it was painfully clear how these courtiers, these Targaryens, relished turning every gesture into a political statement. Aenys, from his seat on the dais, chatted with a highborn lady from the Reach, but his gaze flicked repeatedly to the dance floor. Arya read the subtlety. The king wanted to see how Jon handled himself, and perhaps gauge Arya's reaction too. She stiffened, refusing to give him any satisfaction. Instead, she accepted an offer of a conversation from a portly Crownlands lord who claimed to breed fine horses, letting him drone on as she half-listened. Her mind, meanwhile, roamed over possible reasons for this display. Did Aenys intend to pit brother against sister? Or was he hoping to stoke rumors that might undermine their marriage? The man likely had 100 plans swirling behind that pleasant facade. When the dance ended, Jon escorted the princess back to the dais and then returned to Arya's side, a faint tension around his eyes. She murmured, "What did she say?" He lowered his voice. "She asked if I had any claims beyond the north, given my Targaryen blood. I told her plainly I want no crowns but the one given to me by the northern lords." Arya pursed her lips. "And?" She smiled and said her brother is quite interested in my lineage, that he'd like to discuss it further in a private audience. Arya's fingers drummed on the table. "They're testing your loyalty." "Undoubtedly." The feast wound on, culminating in a final toast from King Aenys. Then the crowd began to disperse to more intimate gatherings, some to music rooms, others to private alcoves. Aenys himself left the dais soon after the final toast, disappearing with his Kingsguard and a cluster of courtiers. Jon and Arya were politely informed that their presence was not required at any further festivities that evening. It was almost a dismissal, an unspoken command for them to retreat unless they chose to stay and mingle. They chose not to linger. With a few of their guards in tow, they navigated the corridors back to their guest quarters. Lamps glowed at intervals along the stone walls, their light flickering on suits of armor and woven tapestries depicting Targaryen victories. Ghost met them at the door, tail swishing, as though he had sensed their return from within. Arya ruffled his snowy fur, taking some comfort in the presence of the direwolf, an unbroken tie to the north. Inside they found that servants had laid out mulled wine and a platter of fruit. The guards took their stations outside, and Jon and Arya were left alone. Arya shrugged off her jerkin and sank into a chair near the hearth. Jon sat opposite her, stretching out his legs with a weary sigh. For a moment, they let silence envelop them, broken only by the soft crackle of flames. Finally, Jon said, "It was about what I expected." Arya's eyes flicked up. "I expected worse. But it's early yet. They're still assessing us. The princess is probably reporting everything you said back to Aenys. And no doubt they're planning a formal meeting soon, to pin down all the demands." "Nay." Jon nodded. "Aenys wants to formalize tribute and trade. We can handle that. But I'm more concerned he'll push for an oath of fealty that places us squarely under his command. If we refuse outright, he might threaten to withhold southern grain shipments or meddle with our alliances." Arya's jaw tensed. "Then we'll have to be clever about how we respond. We can't let him starve our people or jeopardize the rebuilding. But neither can we let the North fall into subservience again. We only just fought to secure our own destiny." Jon poured some mulled wine into 2 cups, handing one to Arya. She sipped, grimacing slightly at the sweetness. "We'll find a way," he said quietly. "Let's rest tonight. Tomorrow we'll begin by talking to whoever we can trust here. There might be a few who have no love for Aenys' ambition." She nodded and stood, drifting to the window that opened onto a narrow balcony. The city's myriad lights glimmered like stars, the streets abuzz with nighttime activity, taverns, brothels, gambling dens, the raucous calls of fishmongers near the Blackwater. It was so far removed from the still hush of Winterfell's snowy courtyards. After a while, she turned back. "We should speak with Sansa. If she's here, or if we can send word to wherever she's gone, she might have connections." Joan's face softened at the mention of their sister. "Yes, we will. She was traveling among the southern lords, forging alliances. If she's not in the city, maybe she's somewhere in the Reach. We'll send a raven in the morning." Ned. They settled then, as they did in Winterfell, sharing the bed in tense companionship. The bedchamber was warm enough, yet somehow the weight of the city pressed in, making them both uneasy. Ghost curled at the foot of the bed, a watchful sentinel in the night. Sleep claimed them in fits, haunted by half-remembered dreams of castles in snow and dragons in the sky. The next day, the formalities commenced in earnest. A contingent of Targaryen guards summoned them for a midday audience in a smaller council chamber. Jon and Arya arrived together, escorted by their own northern guard. The room was long, with a rectangular table. Large windows let in the daylight, illuminating a mural on the far wall that depicted Aegon the Conqueror's landing at the mouth of the Blackwater centuries ago. A tapestry on the adjacent wall showed dragons blazing overhead, lords kneeling at Aegon's feet. King Aenys sat at the head of the table with Princess Rhaella on his right. A handful of advisors and clerks were present, men in fine robes, some wearing the sigils of houses sworn to Targaryens. The tall Kingsguard knight stood at a discreet distance, silent and watchful. John and Arya took seats opposite the king, the tension palpable. Aenys folded his hands on the table. Good day, King John. Lady Arya, thank you for attending. Let us begin by reviewing the list of potential trade agreements that might benefit both the North and the Crown. He gestured to one of his advisors, a balding man with a thin mustache and a sheaf of parchment. The advisor droned on about shipping lanes, tariffs, levy rates, and the matter of goods the North might supply to the capital: furs, timber, iron ore. In return, the Crown would facilitate shipments of grain, fruit, wine, and other staples that the North lacked in abundance. John listened intently, occasionally nodding or interjecting to clarify how the harsh winters might affect supply schedules. Arya remained mostly silent, letting John handle the bulk of the negotiation. She watched Aenys and Rhaella's expressions, trying to gauge any ulterior motives. After an hour of back and forth, they'd reached a set of tentative terms. It was time to move on to the more contentious topic: fealty and autonomy. Aenys cleared his throat. Now, regarding the matter of official fealty to the Iron Throne, the North has historically knelt to the Crown since Aegon's conquest, barring the brief period of independence under Robb Stark and subsequent events. I believe we can formalize an arrangement that respects the North's unique status while ensuring unity in the realm. Joan's gaze hardened slightly. We have no intention of seceding, if that's your concern. But the North has declared me king, by right of our own lords. We won't undermine that authority. Aenys' polite smile never wavered. I appreciate your candor. Let us say, for the sake of the realm's stability, you acknowledge the Iron Throne as the ultimate seat of Westeros, while retaining your title as king in the North. A courtesy title, but recognized by me and my court. In exchange, the North pledges to come to the Crown's aid should any foreign or internal threat arise. And of course you provide the usual tribute, though we can negotiate adjustments given your region's harsher climate. Nay. Arya noted how smoothly he proposed to reduce King in the North to a courtesy title. She studied John. He was silent a moment, evidently weighing the ramifications. Then he answered, "We can discuss specifics. The North will stand with the realm against threats that endanger us all, as we did against the White Walkers. We have no wish to isolate ourselves. But I want it understood that the North will govern itself in all but matters of realm-wide significance. We do not seek to pay lip service, we merely want to safeguard our people's rights." Aenys' fingers tapped the table. "And what of your lineage? It is no secret you are of Targaryen blood, through your father Rhaegar. The realm wonders if that might grant you a claim to the Iron Throne itself." John tensed. He felt Arya stiffen beside him. The king's question was as direct as it was dangerous. "I've no desire for that throne," John said firmly, eyes steady on Aenys. "I never have." "Then it is your wish that I continue to reign as king of the Seven Kingdoms." Aenys' smile gleamed like a blade. John nodded. "Yes." A moment of silence hung in the air. One of Aenys' advisors coughed, scribbling notes. Princess Rhaella let out a small sigh, as though disappointed not to see John claim a right to the throne. Aenys seemed faintly amused. "Very well. If that is your stance, we shall incorporate that assurance into our formal agreements. Of course, we will require your signature, King John, on a document affirming you renounce any claim to the Iron Throne. A simple piece of parchment, but important for quieting rumors." Arya's jaw tightened. She could hear the trap in it. Once John signed such a document, if conflict ever arose, or if Aenys turned tyrant, the North would be bound by that renunciation. But perhaps the realm needed that reassurance. If John refused, it would only inflame suspicions. John, for his part, simply answered, "I'll consider it once I've reviewed the wording. We both know how important language can be in these matters." Aenys laughed lightly, as though they were sharing a jest. "Naturally. We'll draw something up for your inspection in a few days' time. Now the last point of interest for today, the question of your marriage." Nentai. Arya's spine went rigid. She sensed the others in the room shift, clearly uneasy about such a personal matter being aired so bluntly. Aenys lifted a hand to quell any protest. "Your marriage is your own affair, of course, but in the eyes of the faith and many lords, it remains unusual. I do wonder if you've considered how it might affect the succession in the North, or if you have any plans for an heir. Joan's face darkened. Our marriage was recognized by the northern lords, and sanctified by the old gods. The succession in the north is likewise our concern. Ennis inclined his head, a show of feigned humility. But of course, yet you must understand, the realm has its traditions. If the Starks wish to maintain legitimacy in every eye, it might be prudent to secure the blessing of the faith of the Seven as well. Even if it's largely ceremonial, it would quell any whispering about certain taboo bloodlines. Arya could not hold back. You mean you'd like to parade us before a Septon and have him declare our union valid so that you can pretend to be the unifying force of the realm? A flicker of annoyance flashed in the king's eyes, though his voice remained smooth. I believe it would benefit everyone if the faith saw you as a legitimate and blessed couple. After all, you're forging new ties between old houses, Targaryen, Stark and Targaryen again. Jon bristled, exchanging a glance with Arya. They both knew how many in the north scorned the faith of the Seven, favoring the old gods. And Arya had made it clear that she did not see her marriage as something for public spectacle. Still, refusing the king's offer could be perceived as defiance. Jon finally said, "Well, consider it, though I make no promises." Ennis smiled. "That is all I ask. Princess Rhaella, would you be so kind as to see to the details if our northern friends agree? Perhaps arrange an audience with the High Septon next week." Rhaella inclined her head demurely. "As you wish, brother." And so the meeting ended on that fraught note. Jon and Arya exited the council chamber feeling as though they had narrowly avoided stepping into several snares. The trade arrangement seemed workable, and the question of fealty might be negotiated without too much damage to the North's autonomy. But the matter of Jon's renunciation of the throne, coupled with the suggestion of a faith-blessed ceremony, left them uneasy. They reunited with their guards in the corridor. One of the men reported that a messenger had arrived from the city gates carrying a sealed letter for Arya Stark. Intrigued, she took the parchment immediately, noting the wax seal shaped like a wolf's head. She frowned, stepping aside with Jon to break it open. The script was neat, straightforward. A single line, "I am in King's Landing at present. Meet me at the old stables near the Dragon Pit at twilight." Arya felt her heart jump. She passed it to Jon, who read it quickly, eyebrows lifting. "S.T. That must be Sansa." "Nay." Arya nodded, glancing around as though expecting watchers to leap out from behind the tapestries. "We should go. She's found us first, it seems." Jon agreed. They collected themselves, and after a brief respite in their quarters to shed the formal trappings, they prepared to leave the Red Keep. Of course, the Targaryen guards at the gates frowned when Jon and Arya expressed a desire to wander the city unescorted. But Jon had carefully cultivated a stance of courtesy, explaining that they merely wished to see King's Landing with their own eyes. He refused a large escort, allowing only a pair of guards from his own retinue, and they took Ghost with them, ignoring protests that the Deerwolf was too fearsome for the city streets. If Ennis found it inappropriate, so be it. They descended through winding streets. The afternoon sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across cobblestones. The tang of salt from Blackwater Bay mingled with the stench of refuse, unwashed bodies, and the pungent odors of fish markets. Crowds parted for the white direwolf, gasping or staring in awe. Jon and Arya, dressed in dark traveling cloaks, kept their hoods up and heads down, blending as much as two wolves in a city of crows could. At last, they reached the older quarter near the Dragon Pit, the massive ruin that once housed Targaryen dragons in centuries past. The roof had collapsed long ago, and the stone dome still stood in partial disrepair. The surrounding area was largely deserted. Not many lingered in the shadow of such a haunted place. A line of old, half-collapsed stables stretched along one side, their doors hanging loosely. Weeds grew through broken floorboards. Jon and Arya exchanged a wary glance. The letter had said to come at twilight. The sun was dipping behind the city's spires, bathing everything in dusky orange. They approached one of the stables with cautious steps. Ghost tensed beside them, sniffing the air. One of the stable doors stood ajar. Suddenly, a figure stepped out, wrapped in a plain cloak of dusty brown. The outline was unmistakable, even before the hood fell back to reveal vibrant auburn hair and a face that, though more mature than in Arya's childhood memories, still held the grace of a Stark. Sansa's blue eyes widened at the sight of them, and for a heartbeat, none of them moved. Sansa, Arya breathed. The older sister smiled, though tears glistened in her eyes. She hurried forward, and the three of them embraced in a tangle of cloaks, Ghost pressing close to sniff at Sansa's side. A pair of Sansa's attendants emerged from the shadows, discreetly keeping watch. For a moment, the siblings clung to each other, the ghosts of their father and mother hovering in their thoughts. "You were here," Sansa whispered, pulling back to look at them. "I got word you'd arrived. I had to see you in secret. If I tried to meet you in the Red Keep, the king's eyes would be all over us." "Oh, Buster." Joan's voice was thick with emotion. "It's good to see you. You look well." Sansa smiled, though the corners of her mouth trembled. "I'm managing. The South has its perils, but I've learned to navigate them." Her gaze flicked from Jon to Arya, noticing how they stood side by side. "So the rumors were true," she said softly. "You two are married." Arya met her sister's eyes. "We did what needed to be done for the North," she said with quiet defiance, though shame still prickled at her for reasons she couldn't name. "It's been strange, but the Lords needed us united." Sansa nodded slowly, an unreadable expression crossing her face. "I see. I'd heard whispers in the courts here. Some were scandalized, others intrigued, but all of them saw it as a power move by House Stark." Jon looked away, swallowing. "Sansa, we've come to treat with King Aenys to hammer out the terms that keep the North safe. He wants me to sign away any claim to the throne, to subjugate ourselves in a new vow of fealty. He also wants a showy ceremony with the faith to bless our marriage." "Oh." Sansa sighed, motioning them inside the dim stable so they could speak more privately. The smell of old hay and dust filled the space. Once they were hidden from view, Sansa's attendants stationed themselves at the entrance. Sansa folded her arms, considering. "Aenys is cunning, far more so than he appears. He's been courting alliances with some of the major houses in the Reach, the Stormlands, and even Dorne, though the Martells remain wary. He's consolidated enough power that no single region wants to test him alone." "Well, once," Arya nodded. "So if we defy him, we risk more than just Targaryen troops." "Yes," Sansa confirmed. "He could starve you out by cutting off southern grain shipments. The North can't afford that yet, not with winter still clinging. Or he could align with the Vale and the Riverlands, though the Riverlands are still piecing themselves back together. But believe me, he'll exploit every angle." She paused, studying Arya's face. "Are you truly all right with what this marriage means? The court gossips are salivating over your union." Arya drew in a breath. "It is what it is, Sansa. We're making it work. You know as well as anyone how duty can shape a life." Her tone was firm, though a flicker of old sisterly vulnerability flared in her eyes. Sansa touched Arya's cheek gently, her voice soft. "I won't pretend to understand fully, but you have my support always. We're family." Jon, sensing the swell of emotion, cleared his throat. "What about you, Sansa? Why are you in King's Landing? I thought you were still traveling in the Reach." She let out a small sigh. "I was, but I came back when I heard about the new king's demands. I wanted to see if there was a way to secure better terms for the North. I've been speaking privately with some lords who resent the Targaryens or worry about their growing power. But it's risky. Aenys spies are everywhere." Arya's eyes narrowed. "So we're not without allies." "Potential allies, yes," Sansa clarified. "But they're cautious. If it looks like Aenys is winning, they'll side with him out of self-preservation. We need to show we're not an easy target, that we have leverage." "Nay." Jon stroked Ghost's fur, feeling the direwolf's steady presence. "What leverage do we have, beyond withholding iron or timber? We can't exactly threaten open war. The North would suffer too greatly." Sansa pursed her lips. "We can negotiate the trade deal so that the crown depends on certain northern resources it can't easily get elsewhere, like the exceptional quality of our steel, or the large stores of obsidian from Dragonstone that we can help extract if we have an arrangement. I've heard rumors that the Targaryens are trying to hatch more dragons, though none have succeeded since Daenerys' short-lived brood. If that's true, they might need all sorts of resources, from stable fodder to volcanic minerals for the eggs. We can't be sure." But if they're meddling with old Valerian sorcery, they'll need help. No. Jon exchanged a look with Arya, remembering the terror of facing even one adult dragon. The notion of Targaryens trying to bring dragons back en masse was unsettling, to say the least. If they need the North's help, we have a bargaining chip, Jon said. Sansa nodded. Yes, but you must tread carefully. Aenys is vain. Challenge him too openly and he'll lash out. Arya crossed her arms, leaning against a half-rotted support beam. What do you suggest? For now, play along with his demands in public. Negotiate the wording of the fealty document so it doesn't place the North in a chokehold. As for the faith ceremony, maybe consider it if it means securing more favor in the eyes of southern lords. Aenys is using moral posturing to weaken your standing. If you appear contrite or willing to abide by the faith's blessing, you might disarm some critics. Nizir. Arya's lips thinned. Bowing to their septons feels wrong. Sansa gave her a sympathetic look. I understand. But sometimes, a small concession saves you from greater ones. After the ceremony, you can always continue to honor the old gods. People do it all the time. Swear to the seven publicly, worship their own gods in private. Naomi. Jon rubbed the bridge of his nose. It seems dishonest. So is most of what goes on in King's Landing, Sansa said wryly. You both know that better than anyone. They fell into a hushed silence. Outside, the sky grew darker, twilight settling in earnest. Ghost let out a low rumble, ears flicking at the distant sound of footfalls. One of Sansa's attendants slipped in, whispering that a patrol of gold cloaks was passing nearby. They all went still, waiting until the footfalls receded. At length, Sansa exhaled. I should go. Meeting you here is dangerous enough as it is. I'll arrange a safer place for us to talk soon. In the meantime, be cautious around the king's sister, Rhaella. She's sharp, and from what I hear, she wants to see House Targaryen remain the only real power in Westeros. They embraced once more. Sansa's arms lingered around Arya, a quiet affirmation of love that transcended the strangeness of their shared past. Then she clasped Jon's hand, giving him a resolute nod. Remember, the North looks to you now. Don't let these vipers corner you into giving up what we fought for. Nah, I won't, Jon promised, voice low. Take care, Sansa. And with that, she slipped out into the gloom, her attendants flanking her, disappearing into King's Landing's labyrinthine streets. Jon and Arya waited a minute, ensuring the coast was clear, then left the stable with their guards. They made their way back to the Red Keep in silence. Ghosts prowled at their side, pausing now and then to sniff at grimy corners or peer at the scuttling rats that emerged under the city's gloom. Back in the safety of their quarters, they discussed Sansa's words. The notion of a public blessing by the faith churned Arya's stomach, yet she admitted it might be the pragmatic step. Jon sat on the edge of the bed, restless, turning over in his mind how best to preserve northern sovereignty. The idea of signing away any claim to the Iron Throne was not in itself problematic. He truly did not want that seat, but the language in such a document could bind the North in ways they might later regret. They agreed they needed an accomplished scribe or lawyer to parse the text once Aenys presented it. They also recognized that Sansa's possible alliances could be crucial. For the time being, all they could do was wait and brace themselves. The following days played out as a sequence of polite gatherings, hushed negotiations, and courtly intrigues. Arya sparred in a courtyard one morning with a group of Targaryen guards who had foolishly assumed a northern woman could not match their skill. She disarmed one after another, earning a small crowd of onlookers. Some applauded, others whispered disapproval. Jon spent hours in dull meetings with the king's advisors, hammering out details of tariffs and shipping routes. Aenys himself floated in and out of these discussions, offering magnanimous smiles while making veiled references to the North's obligations. Princess Rhaella lurked as well, occasionally cornering Jon to ask about his experiences in battle or his history in the Night's Watch, as though she were trying to piece together the puzzle of the man who carried the blood of Rhaegar Targaryen. One afternoon, Jon and Arya were summoned to a private luncheon with Aenys and Rhaella. The table was laden with fresh fruits, cheeses, breads, and wine. They dined in a sunlit chamber overlooking the Red Keep's outer walls, the conversation starting off innocuously enough, chatter about the weather, the city's reconstruction, the presence of lingering refugees. Then, as servants cleared the plates, Aeneas leaned forward. About the faith ceremony, he began. Have you decided? My sister and I would be honored to host it here in the Great Sept. Arya maintained a neutral expression. We're still discussing it. The northern people are not devout followers of the Seven. Rhaella interjected. Of course not. But think how it would strengthen ties. People across the realm would see that House Stark respects the faith. It would dispel rumors about the unnatural aspects of your union. Jon set his goblet down firmly. We're well aware of the rumors. Our marriage was recognized under the old gods, as is our right in the north. Aeneas spread his hands in a conciliatory gesture. Indeed. But many in the south do not appreciate the old gods. They see them as archaic, even barbaric. A small ceremony now could save endless headaches later. Malmendoran. Arya's gaze flicked to Jon, and she saw the resolve in his face begin to crack. He was thinking of what Sansa had said, of the practicality in appeasing the southern lords. She felt her throat tighten. She did not want to kneel before septons and recite vows. Their original wedding ceremony had been awkward enough, a somber, intimate affair by the weirwood in Winterfell's Godswood. To do so again as a pageant felt like mocking everything she treasured about her home. Yet, the political logic was overwhelming. Jon's voice was measured when he finally spoke. We'll agree, on the condition that the ceremony is brief and respectful of our own beliefs. No mockery of the old gods. Aeneas inclined his head. You have my word. We'll keep it brief, a simple reaffirmation for the sake of unity. Arya exhaled through her nose, forcing herself to nod. Rhaella's lips curved in a small triumphant smile. Then I shall make the necessary arrangements, the princess said. We can hold it within a fortnight. The king shifted topics smoothly to talk of a grand feast that would follow, ensuring the Lords of King's Landing and visiting dignitaries could witness the blessed union. Jon and Arya endured the rest of the luncheon, each swallowing their frustration behind polite masks. They had conceded for the good of the North. Part of Arya wanted to throw her goblet across the table, but she calmed herself by remembering Sansa's advice. A show of contrition now might ease the path forward. In the days that followed, the prospect of that faith-blessed ceremony hung over them like a dark cloud. Rhaella, true to her word, mobilized the royal stewards. Plans were laid for a brief rite in the Great Sept of Baelor, with the High Septon presiding. Arya was forced to endure fittings for a southern-style gown, though she refused anything overly frilly or constricting. Jon, meanwhile, was pressed to choose men for his wedding escort from among the northerners in his retinue, men who wore the Stark sigil. As if that weren't enough, Aeneas's scribes presented a draft of the renunciation document for Jon to sign. It was written in flowery legalese, brimming with references to the line of Rhaegar Targaryen and foregoing any claim present or future to the Iron Throne. Jon was grateful for one of Sansa's discreet allies, a minor lord from the Vale who had once studied at the Citadel. He helped dissect the wording, identifying subtle clauses that might have placed the North in a precarious position. Jon insisted on revisions, removing any suggestion that the North's sovereignty could be revoked at the Crown's whim. Days of back and forth followed, with scribes crossing out lines, rewriting paragraphs and passing the parchment from one party to another. Aeneas for the moment indulged these negotiations with a patient smile, though Arya suspected he might be growing annoyed beneath the surface. During a rare quiet moment, Jon met Arya in the courtyard, where she was performing her usual blade drills. Late afternoon sunlight bathed the red stone walls. Ghost lay in a patch of sun, lazily following Arya's movement with his blood-red eyes. Jon waited until she finished a series of swift strikes against a practice dummy before speaking. They've agreed to remove the most egregious parts of the renunciation, he said, leaning against a pillar. It seems we'll only be stating that I personally have no claim to the throne. Arya wiped sweat from her brow. That's good, she said, voice tinged with relief. Still, I hate that you have to sign anything. You never wanted that bloody throne in the first place. No way. Jon shrugged, a tired resignation in his eyes. Better a piece of parchment than another war. If this is the price for peace, I'll pay it. Arya nodded, then turned her gaze to the sky, as though the mere mention of war conjured images of ravens blotting out the sun. And after the ceremony, after we sign, we can leave, right? He hesitated. That's what Aenys says. But we should secure everything first. The trade deals, the recognition of our autonomy, the shipments for the upcoming winter. If he drags his feet, we may be stuck here longer. Now, doll. Arya's scowl deepened. I'm already weary of these halls. Jon felt the same. He offered a faint smile. We'll endure. At least Sansa is here, working in the shadows to garner support. She's hinted that if the king overplays his hand, certain lords might stand with us. Arya eased her sword back into its scabbard. I trust her more than I trust any Targaryen in this place. A footman approached then, bowing stiffly. Your Graces, Princess Rhaella requests your presence in the royal sept to discuss the wedding rehearsal. He said the last words with forced politeness, as though reciting a line he found absurd. Jon stifled a sigh, glancing at Arya. She rolled her eyes but nodded. Together they followed the footman through the keep, ascending a spiral staircase to a modest sept. It was nowhere near as grand as the great sept of Baelor in the city below, but it was richly decorated with stained glass depictions of the seven. The father, the mother, the warrior, the maiden, the smith, the crone, and the stranger. The air smelled faintly of incense. Princess Rhaella stood near the altar, flanked by two septas in pale robes. She turned, her face lighting up with what might have passed for genuine excitement if Arya hadn't been so suspicious of her. Ah, you've come. I wanted to go over the basic structure of the ritual, so there are no surprises. Arya's pulse quickened with annoyance. This was not the life she had envisioned, standing in a southern sept while a Targaryen princess instructed her on how to kneel, how to recite vows she barely believed in. But she forced herself to remain calm. She would not give Rhaella the satisfaction of seeing her chafe. One of the septas stepped forward, a scroll in hand. We've planned a short litany, acknowledging the vows already taken before your old gods. Then you will each reaffirm your commitment under the seven, effectively bridging the faiths. After which, you shall offer a token gesture, perhaps rings or clasped hands, before the High Septon pronounces the union doubly sanctioned. I know. Arya forced her voice to remain steady. That's it? Rhaella nodded. Yes, it will be brief, but the presence of the High Septon ensures its legitimacy. The city's nobles will attend, at least, the influential ones. The king has invited some from across the realm, including key houses in the Vale and the Stormlands. Jon frowned. This is more than a simple reaffirmation, then. It's a grand statement. Rhaella gave a delicate shrug. It can't be helped. The court is abuzz with curiosity. Think of it as an opportunity to display unity. And afterward, no one can question the legality or sanctity of your marriage. Arya said nothing. Her mind conjured images of standing before a crowd of strangers, reciting words that felt hollow. But perhaps it was a necessary farce. The septas ran through a brief rehearsal, showing where Jon and Arya would stand, how the lines would be spoken. Arya bit back her frustration when they asked her to kneel. Her body tensed, but she did it once, wanting to see it done so she could avoid mistakes later. Jon shot her a glance of quiet sympathy. Even he seemed uncomfortable repeating the lines of the seven. At length, Rhaella dismissed them with a fluttery wave of her hand. We'll do a final run-through in 3 days, and then the ceremony itself will be held on the 7th day from now. The entire city will celebrate. Won't that be lovely? She said, smiling. Arya only nodded once, curtly. Jon thanked the septas, his voice polite, then ushered Arya out. The moment they were in the corridor, she released a pent-up breath. Gods, Jon, I can't stand that woman. He put an arm around her shoulder, steering her away from potential eavesdroppers. I know, but hold steady. In a week's time, we'll have done our duty, and we can turn our thoughts north again. They returned to their quarters, each subdued by the weight of what lay ahead. A wolf in the south was always in danger of becoming a spectacle for the city's amusement. But they knew the stakes. If kneeling once in a sept gave the north a better chance to survive, and to remain sovereign, then they would bear it. Still, the tension in Arya's eyes spoke volumes. She had endured so many trials, from traveling across the sea to training with the faceless men, only to end up here. A reluctant bride, about to be paraded under a faith she did not believe in. That evening, they conferred with Sansa in a quiet alcove near the royal library. Sansa confirmed that the ceremony had stirred anticipation among the lords. Enys is clever, she said softly, ensuring no one overheard. He's positioning this as a grand unification event. Targaryen and Stark, sealing old rifts. People are already placing bets on whether the pair of you will produce children soon, forging a new line that marries wolf and dragon. Arya's cheeks burned. They can keep their bets to themselves. Jon steered the conversation back to politics. Will this help us or hurt us? Likely help in the short term, Sansa admitted. The lords who were on the fence about your marriage might decide it's legitimate after all. That could keep the king from pressing you further. But be cautious. If you complete this ceremony and then try to defy the crown, it might spark accusations of heresy. Aenys will say you used the faith for convenience, and then turned your back on it. Jon nodded grimly. So we can't simply sign the papers and run back to Winterfell. We'll have to maintain a certain level of cooperation, at least on the surface. Sansa's eyes darted around the shadowy alcove. Yes. Meanwhile, I'm quietly rallying a few sympathetic lords. If the crown ever overreaches against the north, we might have enough support to deter them, without bloodshed, we hope. Now Brian. Arya exhaled, meeting her sister's gaze. Thank you. The week dragged on. Word spread throughout the city that a spectacle would take place in the great sept of Baelor. Shopkeepers displayed wolf and dragon sigils side by side, hawking cheap trinkets to commemorate the event. Courtiers who had once whispered behind Arya's back now fawned over her, hoping for an invitation to the feast. Jon found that every conversation in the Red Keep inevitably veered to the upcoming ceremony. Meanwhile, the document of renunciation went through its final revisions, and the trade agreements were finalized. Despite the constant headache of courtly politics, Jon sensed they were near the end of this ordeal, if all went well. At last the appointed day arrived. Bright sunlight bathed King's Landing from dawn, as though the city itself conspired to ensure no gloom marred the festivities. The great sept of Baelor loomed in the heart of the city, an immense dome of white marble, flanked by towering statues of the seven carved from the same stone. Guards lined the wide steps, forming a corridor for the highborn guests to ascend. Banners flapped in the gentle breeze, Targaryen black and red, Stark gray and white. Inside the sept was awash in color from stained glass windows. Rows of pews and benches were filled with nobles from across the realm, each donned in finery that sparkled under the candlelit chandeliers. The High Septon, draped in ornate robes, stood at the altar, flanked by lesser septons and septas. King Aenys sat to one side on a cushioned seat, his own retinue of advisors behind him. Princess Rhaella, resplendent in crimson silk, stood near her brother. Sansa was among the crowd, seated with a few allies. She caught Arya's eye and nodded once, a small gesture of support. Outside the sept, common folk gathered in droves, unable to enter but determined to witness the aftermath or hear the chants echoing from within. Jon waited at the front, wearing a formal tunic of dark gray wool, trimmed with white fur, a direwolf emblem emblazoned on his chest. Despite the warmth of the day, he felt a chill in his bones, a mixture of nerves and deep discomfort at what this ceremony represented. His eyes flicked over the congregation, noticing how many unfamiliar faces peered up at him. Ghost, not allowed inside the holy space, was presumably pacing outside with the northern guards. At a signal from one of the septons, the music began, a soft hymn to the seven. The crowd turned to see Arya's entrance. She walked alone, having refused any southern retainer to guide her. She wore a gown of dark gray fabric, elegantly cut but without frills, her hair partially braided back and woven with a single white ribbon. A hush fell as she made her way down the aisle, boots peeking out beneath the hem of the gown, a nod to her unorthodox nature. Her face was composed, jaw set, though her eyes betrayed tension. She reached Jon, and they stood together before the High Septon. The music died away, leaving only the hushed breath of the crowd. A faint echo resounded under the high dome. The High Septon raised his arms in a gesture of benediction. His voice resonated, surprisingly strong for an older man. We gather here beneath the gaze of the seven, to recognize and sanctify the union of Jon, king in the north, and Arya of House Stark, already wed under the old gods. Today, we honor that union anew. Arya could feel hundreds of eyes on her back. She forced herself to stand tall, to keep her breathing steady. She glanced sideways at John, who offered a reassuring nod. The High Septon continued, "This reaffirmation shall serve as a bridge between the old ways and the new, reminding us that we are all children of the gods, no matter our home or heritage. Do you both willingly seek this blessing?" John's voice came firm, if subdued. "I do." Arya hesitated for the briefest instant. Then she echoed quietly, "I do." "Then kneel," the High Septon said gently. They both went down on one knee upon a small cushion placed at the altar. Arya felt a flush creep up her neck. She reminded herself of the greater purpose, preserving peace for the North, safeguarding their people. She heard the Septon's robe rustle as he moved closer. He held his hands above their heads. "By the light of the Father may you judge rightly. By the light of the Mother may you protect innocence. By the light of the warrior may you defend the weak. By the light of the maiden may you remain pure in heart. By the light of the smith may you build and uphold. By the light of the crone may you find wisdom. And by the guidance of the stranger may you face the unknown with courage." Nyarans. He paused, allowing the solemn words to sink in. Then he asked, "John, King in the North, do you reaffirm your vow to Arya Stark, forsaking all others, pledging to stand as husband and protector before gods and men?" John lifted his head. "I do." The High Septon turned to Arya. "Arya Stark, do you reaffirm your vow to John, to stand as wife and shield, to honor and keep faith with him before gods and men?" Arya's throat felt tight, but she forced the words out. "I do." A gentle murmur swept through the sept, the soft rustle of fine garments as the audience looked on. The High Septon made a sign in the air, then gestured for them to stand. "In the sight of the seven, I bless this union as sacred and whole. Let all present bear witness that John and Arya of House Stark stand united under the old gods and the new." A spattering of applause followed. From her seat, Sansa gave a small, grateful smile. King Aenys nodded to show his approval, as though he personally had orchestrated this moment of unity. Arya felt an odd buzzing in her ears. It was done. Another vow, another chain, however gilded. Yet if it granted the North what it needed, she would endure. They turned to face the crowd. The sept erupted in louder applause. Arya could see a mix of expressions, some genuinely moved, others merely curious or calculating. She spotted a few northern bannermen, men who had traveled with them, applauding respectfully. Rhaella flashed a brilliant smile from near the dais, looking every bit the gracious royal host. Then the final part of the ceremony, the High Septon intoned, "Let the realm rejoice in the bridging of faiths, and may these two serve as an example of unity. In the name of the seven, they are wed anew." John and Arya stepped down from the altar, escorted by a pair of septas toward a side exit that led to the courtyard, where the wedding feast would begin. As they walked, courtiers pressed in, offering congratulations, bowing, praising the union of wolf and dragon. Arya could barely keep track of the voices, her senses overwhelmed by the swirl of color and perfume and noise. John felt her hand tense in his, and he squeezed gently, a silent reassurance. Outside, beneath the bright sky, tables had been arranged in the courtyard with wine, food, and musicians playing lively tunes. The throng of guests began to stream out from the septii. Arya caught a glimpse of Sansa weaving through the crowd. She wanted desperately to flee somewhere quieter, but the protocol demanded they remain for at least a while, receiving well-wishers. King Aenys approached, flanked by Rhaella and a small retinue. He extended a hand in greeting. "Congratulations, my friends. What a splendid ceremony, was it not?" John offered a polite bow of the head. "We appreciate the crown's hospitality." Aenys clasped Joan's arm with a show of camaraderie, then turned to Arya. "Lady Arya, you looked radiant. I'm certain the small folk will speak of this day for years to come, how the North and the crown came together in faith." Arya's face was carefully composed. "We did what was needed to foster peace." The king smiled, ignoring the faint sting in her words. "Indeed. Come, let us not dwell on seriousness. Today should be a celebration." Windendines. He led them deeper into the courtyard, where servants poured arbor gold into tall cups. Princess Rhaella steered Arya to a small dais where gifts were displayed, token offerings from lords around the realm. Arya cast a bored glance at the finery. Jeweled daggers, embroidered cloths, carved wooden boxes, silver circlets. None of it felt real to her, just an array of prettily packaged bribes. Sansa appeared at Arya's side, slipping an arm through hers. "You did well," she whispered. "It was short at least." Arya couldn't help a wry smile. "Yes, short. Thank the gods for that." Nay. Rhaella introduced them to a line of southern ladies who prattled on about fashion and the novelty of a second wedding ceremony. Arya answered minimally, letting Sansa carry the brunt of the pleasantries. She could sense Sansa's well-honed skill in managing such encounters, offering just the right compliments, redirecting questions deftly. Arya was grateful for her sister's presence. It kept her from snapping at the more condescending courtiers who marveled at a northern savage in a southern gown. Meanwhile, Jon was cornered by a cluster of lords from the Vale and the Westerlands. He endured their effusive congratulations, politely deflecting insinuations that he might someday bring northern armies south. Some asked about the White Walkers, curious if the tales were exaggerated. Jon gave them mild, clipped answers, unwilling to relive those horrors for the amusement of men who had never faced them. Hours wore on under the bright sun. Food and wine flowed freely, and musicians struck up faster tunes. Some of the guests broke into dancing. Arya resisted all invitations, preferring to hover at the edge of the courtyard with a cup of watered wine. Jon tried to keep to her side, though he was repeatedly dragged into conversations. Eventually, the pace of the festivities slowed, and guests began drifting away to explore the city or retire to their rooms. The official wedding feast would continue for some time, but it seemed they would not be missed if they took their leave. Arya and Jon exchanged a look, wordlessly agreeing they'd had enough of the spectacle. They made their exit, accompanied by a minimal guard detail, and found Ghost waiting faithfully near the Red Keep's entrance. The direwolf wagged his tail in a restrained greeting, sniffing at their clothes, as though disapproving of the perfumed stench of courtiers clinging to them. Arya let out a heavy breath, placing a hand on Ghost's thick fur. "Let's go inside. I need to wash and be away from these people." Jon's expression was solemn. "We did it. Perhaps now the king will finalize everything and let us be." No. Together, they ascended to their quarters, the hush of the corridors a welcome relief after the cacophony outside. Once inside, Arya peeled off the gown with a grimace, tossing it aside. She changed into a simpler tunic and breeches, feeling as though she could finally breathe. Jon removed his formal tunic, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Ghost paced around, sniffing the corners as if checking for threats. They settled by the hearth where a fire had been prepared. Light from the tall windows gave the room a warm glow. For a long moment, neither spoke. The ceremony, the day's events, all of it lay thick in the air. Arya poured 2 cups of mead, handing one to Jon. He stared into its amber depths. "At least it's over," he murmured. Arya nodded. "Yes, that's something." He took a sip, glancing at her. "Are you all right?" She gave a short, humorless laugh. "I suppose so. I've been through worse, but kneeling in front of that crowd, repeating vows I don't believe in, it felt wrong." Jon reached out, tentatively touching her hand. "I'm sorry." She shrugged, eyes distant. "Don't be. It wasn't your idea. We did what we had to." They fell silent again, drinking the mead in slow sips. The sunlight shifted as late afternoon wore on, lengthening shadows. From somewhere in the distance they could still hear the faint notes of music drifting from the courtyard. Finally, Jon set his cup aside. "I'll speak to Aenys tomorrow about the final signings. With luck, we can leave within the week." Arya exhaled, a measure of relief creeping into her expression. "I want to go home. Winterfell might be under snow, but it's ours." "No way." Jon nodded, taking her hand more firmly now. "Soon." They remained like that, letting the quiet of the room soothe them, until the shadows grew long and the sun dipped below the city skyline. Servants eventually knocked, offering a light supper which Jon and Arya ate with minimal conversation. They were exhausted. The tension of the ceremony weighed on them both, another reminder that the eyes of the realm were upon them, scrutinizing their every move. Night fell over King's Landing, and the wedding feast outside continued in pockets of revelry, though neither Jon nor Arya felt inclined to rejoin the festivities. They changed for bed, carefully latching the door. Ghost lay near the hearth, ears pricked for any sign of disturbance. For a time, John and Arya lay awake, side by side beneath the linens, each lost in separate thoughts. The flickering candlelight played across the walls. Eventually, fatigue claimed them, though the sleep they found was uneasy, burdened by the knowledge that even their private moments might be overshadowed by the demands of a realm forever hungry for spectacle. Morning came too early, heralded by the brassy calls of trumpets in the yard. John rose, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and found that messages had been slipped under the door. One was from Sansa, congratulating them on surviving the ceremony and noting that she had arranged another discreet meeting in 2 days' time. The second was from Aenys' steward, summoning John to discuss the final matters of state that afternoon. John read the steward's note aloud to Arya. "It seems we're near the end of this. I'll go, finalize the wording, and sign." Arya stretched, rolling her shoulders as though shaking off a lingering ache. "Want me to come with you?" He considered it, then shook his head. "I doubt Aenys wants you there. He'll say it's a matter of the crown and the king in the north. Better not to provoke him unnecessarily. I'd rather you keep watch from the outside. Maybe meet with Sansa's contacts, see if there's any last-minute shift we should know about." "Nansiket, Nidnor Arya frowned. "Be careful." "I will." They broke their fast on bread and boiled eggs, then parted ways. Arya donned her practical leathers and set off into the keep, trailed by one guard and Ghost. She intended to see if any rumors were circulating about the ceremony, or about the king's next moves. John went to the appointed chamber, a small council room lined with shelves of dusty tomes. There, he found King Aenys seated at a table, the renunciation document spread before him. A handful of scribes hovered nearby, along with a bored-looking Rhaella. The king greeted John with his usual measured politeness. "Good morning, King John. Shall we finalize these terms?" John inclined his head. "Yes, let's." He read through the parchment one last time, making sure the final edits had been applied. The text now clearly stated that Jon Snow, known as the King in the North, acknowledged King Aenys Targaryen as the sole ruler of the Iron Throne, that Jon himself made no personal claim, nor would he press one on behalf of any potential heirs. But it did not bind the North to unconditional obedience or tribute beyond what was customary. It also included a clause preserving the North's right to self-govern in local matters, reaffirming the original arrangement the North had with past Targaryen kings before Robert's rebellion. Jon nodded slowly. It was as acceptable as it could be under the circumstances. With a flourish, Aenys pushed the inkwell forward. Jon dipped the quill, pressing his name onto the parchment. The black ink glistened for a moment. Then Aenys added his own signature, followed by Rhaella's as a witness. The scribes gathered around, blowing on the ink to dry it, their eyes gleaming with satisfaction. They would carry these precious documents into the annals of history, proof of the Targaryen crown's renewed dominion. Aenys stood, smiling. "There we have it. The realm will rest easier knowing there is no disputed claim on the throne." Jon's jaw tightened a fraction. "The realm was never in danger from me." "Of course," Aenys said smoothly. "But appearances matter. Now, as to your departure, I assume you'll be leaving us soon." "Yes," Jon said. "We plan to gather our retinue and depart within days. The North has been too long without its king." Aenys clasped his hands behind his back. "I understand. Perhaps before you go, we can share a private supper? I'd like to speak with you about one last matter." Suspicion flickered across Jon's expression. "What matter?" Aenys' violet eyes gleamed. "Merely a question of lineage. As you're well aware, the Targaryen line has grown thin. My sister and I remain, along with a few distant cousins. We must ensure our house continues. You carry the blood of Rhaegar, your line is entwined with ours. I'd like to explore how we might collaborate for the future of the realm." "Nay." Jon's wariness deepened. "I'm not sure I understand." Aenys tilted his head, a faint smile on his lips. "Let us discuss it tonight. Rhaella will join us as well. We'll dine in my private solar. Bring your lady wife if you wish. 8 o'clock. Jon had half a mind to refuse, but he hesitated. Aenys had the advantage here. A refusal might be seen as an insult. It was better to glean whatever this collaboration entailed. "Very well, Your Grace. We'll attend." Excellent. Aeneas gestured to a scribe. Have a copy of the signed document delivered to King John's chambers. The scribe bowed. Then the king extended a hand to John. Congratulations, my friend. Our houses stand united. John managed a curt nod, ignoring the man's outstretched hand. He turned and left. Tension coiled in his gut. What new scheme could Aeneas be plotting? He found Arya in the corridor outside, waiting with Ghost. She raised an eyebrow. Done. He held up the parchment. Yes, with all the final wording. We're free of any claim to the throne. But now Aeneas wants a private supper tonight. He mentioned something about continuing the Targaryen line. I don't like the sound of it. Arya's eyes narrowed. Nor do I. They retreated to their rooms to discuss the matter. Arya, ever suspicious, posited that perhaps Aeneas wanted to propose some arrangement involving children, maybe even to wed a future child of Jon and Arya to a Targaryen heir. Jon shuddered at the notion, recalling how Targaryen incest had shaped so many twisted dynasties. Or perhaps the king wanted to coerce them into an alliance in which the North would help the Targaryens reclaim some lost magical relic. The possibilities set Arya's teeth on edge. As evening approached, they steeled themselves for the meeting. Arya decided to accompany Jon, not wanting him to face the king's cryptic proposition alone. Aeneas' invitation was extended to both of them after all. They dressed plainly, no finery, but neat enough to be respectful, then made their way to the king's private solar, a chamber located in one of the Red Keep's towers, overlooking the bay. Ghost followed until the door, where a pair of Kingsguard blocked him. Jon bristled, but Arya patted Ghost's head. We'll be fine, she murmured, though she wasn't entirely sure of it. The solar was an opulent room, hung with tapestries depicting dragons in flight. A table in the center bore an array of dishes: roast duck, fresh greens, a bowl of spiced pears, flagons of wine. Aeneas stood by the window, admiring the dusk sky. Rhaella sat at the table, sipping from a golden goblet. Aeneas turned, a practiced smile on his lips. Welcome. Please, join us. Jon and Arya took seats opposite Rhaella. A servant poured wine. For a while, they engaged in superficial pleasantries, praising the meal, discussing the calm weather. Arya found herself wishing they would cut to the chase. She watched Aeneas and Rhaella closely. The princess wore a serene expression, her silver hair coiled in an elaborate braid. The king seemed genial, but there was an undercurrent of excitement in his eyes, as though he had a prize in mind. Finally, after the main course had been cleared, Aeneas steepled his fingers. My sister and I have been discussing the future of House Targaryen. As you know, Daenerys Targaryen once attempted to restore the dragons. She had some success, though her dragons met tragic ends. We have not given up hope entirely. Jon's stomach clenched. He exchanged a guarded look with Arya. What does that have to do with us? Rhaella leaned in, her voice soft but urgent. We believe that somewhere in the archives of the Citadel, or perhaps in old Valyrian scrolls, there are methods to awaken dormant dragon eggs. The late Queen Daenerys hatched hers through fire and blood, but we suspect there may be gentler ways. No. Aeneas nodded. Precisely. We also know the North has access to certain resources. Dragonglass from Dragonstone, yes, but perhaps other secrets gleaned from your interactions with the children of the forest or the magic that once permeated the far north. Jon's mind flashed to the cave paintings he'd seen near Dragonstone, the swirling symbols. But those related to the White Walkers, not dragons. I'm not aware of any northern secrets that could hatch dragon eggs, he said plainly. The king's smile sharpened. But you carry Targaryen blood, King Jon. A drop of fire runs through your veins. If we were to locate dragon eggs, your presence might help in rituals or experiments. Think of it as a bridging of old magic. Stark and Targaryen, ice and fire. Arya's eyes blazed. That sounds dangerous and foolish. Rhaella inclined her head. No more dangerous than what Queen Daenerys did. The realm has always prospered under dragons. Think of how quickly rebellions or invasions would be quashed if the crown had a living dragon once more. There would be peace. Naswad. Jon could scarcely believe what he was hearing. They wanted to resurrect dragons, harness them anew, possibly using him as some magical catalyst. He could almost sense the ghost of Daenerys Targaryen in the room, remembering her fierce presence and the chaos her dragons had wrought. "You want to breed a new generation of dragons to maintain power," he said, voice tight. Aenys spread his hands, feigning innocence. "To maintain peace. If the realm knows the crown commands dragons, who would dare wage war? This is not about conquest but stability." Arya nearly laughed. "Dragons are weapons. You can't control them as easily as you think. Look at what happened in the past. Kings burned in their own throne rooms, civil wars erupted, entire houses wiped out." Aenys's expression hardened at her tone, but he masked it quickly. "Which is why we must approach this carefully, guided by knowledge. And that is why we wish to consult you, King Jon. Perhaps your blood will serve as a conduit for whatever rituals or spells might be required." Of course, he added smoothly, "This would be entirely voluntary. This would be entirely voluntary. We merely wanted to gauge your interest in collaborating. Think of the prestige for House Stark, being known as the partner that helped bring dragons back." Nah. Jon's face was grim. "I have no interest in meddling with forbidden sorcery. We came here to secure the North's safety, not to spark a new age of dragonfire." Rhaella's lips parted, a hint of disappointment showing. "Are you sure you want to dismiss this opportunity? The North could benefit greatly from a strong crown. We could seal additional alliances. The marriage we saw today is just the beginning." Arya pushed back in her chair, fists clenched on the table. "We've had enough of your alliances. We only want to return home." A moment of tense silence stretched. Aenys shifted, swirling the wine in his goblet. "Very well," he said carefully. "If you truly do not wish to pursue this, I won't press the matter. But I do hope you'll keep an open mind. If the day comes when you desire the crown's favor, or if a threat arises that might require a dragon's might, our door remains open." Jon steadied his breathing. He sensed a veiled threat beneath those polite words, a suggestion that if they refused, the North might find itself vulnerable when danger came knocking. But he would not be cowed. "Your offer is noted," he said flatly. "Now, if that's all, my lady and I will bid you good evening." Aenys forced a smile. "Yes, that is all. Thank you for sharing your time." Jon and Arya rose. She could practically feel the tension radiating from Jon's body as he made a curt bow. Rhaella offered a wan smile in return. Then they left the solar, ignoring the half-formed pleasantries Aenys mumbled after them. In the corridor, Ghost met them, tail swishing anxiously. Arya raked a hand through her hair. "Dragons," she muttered under her breath. "They want to use you as a test subject for some insane experiment." Jon nodded, a dark cloud over his features. "That was the real reason for all this unity talk, securing my cooperation. Bastards." They walked swiftly, heading back to their quarters. They agreed that this development only hastened their need to leave. The Targaryens' ambitions were too dangerous. Better to be far away in the north, where their ice would not be so easily melted by southern cunning. The time for departure was now, if Aenys would not stall them further. Jon would sign the remaining trade agreements and then politely take his leave. No more feasts, no more private suppers. The next morning, they made their preparations. Arya packed their belongings, and Jon met with the stewards to arrange for wagons to carry the supplies Aenys had promised for the north. Sansa came by with a small retinue, tears in her eyes at the thought of them parting again. But she understood. "I'll stay a bit longer," she said, "to keep an ear to the ground. If Aenys attempts anything, I'll send word. For now, he seems satisfied that you've bent to his will in the ways that matter." Arya embraced her sister fiercely. "Be careful," she whispered. "I don't trust them." Sansa managed a smile. "I've learned how to survive these courts. Don't worry about me." Later that day, a final audience was arranged. Aenys and Rhaella bade Jon and Arya farewell in the throne room, flanked by the usual array of courtiers. The king expressed polite regrets that they would not remain for more festivities, but wished them a safe journey. Jon thanked him with equal politeness. Neither side mentioned dragons or sorcery, as if that conversation had never happened. At last, they departed the Red Keep, descending the winding streets of King's Landing. Their northern retinue rode with them, plus the wagons carrying grain, cloth, and other goods. Common folk paused to watch the king in the north pass by, some cheering, others simply curious. Ghost trotted alongside Joan's horse, eyes flicking warily at the throng. By midday they exited the city gates, crossing the rolling plains that stretched south of the Blackwater River. With each mile, Arya felt tension uncoil from her shoulders. Soon, the silhouette of King's Landing vanished behind them, replaced by open sky and distant farmland. The party made good time, eager to put ground between themselves and the capital. That night, they camped in the fields just beyond the Crownlands, the sky awash with stars. A crisp wind blew in from the north, carrying a hint of chill that felt like home. Jon and Arya stood together near the campfire, surveying the tents and wagons. They spoke in low tones about the future, turning to Winterfell, ensuring the north had enough supplies for the winter, continuing the reconstruction efforts. "And what of the Targaryens' talk of dragons?" Arya asked, poking the fire with a stick. Sparks danced into the night. Jon shrugged, jaw tight. "Let them chase their old ghosts. If they succeed, the realm might face a new threat. But if they fail, we might still face chaos. Either way, I want no part of it." "Nidihol." Arya nodded, recalling the majesty and terror of Daenerys dragons in the stories, and how quickly such power could consume the world. "We'll be ready if trouble comes," she said softly. "Winterfell stands." Jon reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Their eyes met in the flickering firelight, and for a moment, the weight of politics and ceremony fell away. They were two wolves, free of the southern dance at last. The hush of the night stretched around them, broken only by the soft murmur of their men preparing for rest, the occasional nicker of horses, and the crackle of the flames. They shared a silent understanding. Their marriage, strange and fraught as it was, had been tempered by these trials. Perhaps it would never be the kind of marriage others expected, but they were united by blood, by war, by the North, and now by vows repeated under two sets of gods. And that unity, forced or not, had made them stronger in the eyes of the realm. Finally, Arya leaned her head against Jon's shoulder, letting out a breath she'd been holding for too long. In the distance, Ghost prowled, sniffing the perimeter for danger. The stars wheeled overhead, constant and silent. They had survived King's Landing, survived the Targaryens' games. Tomorrow they would ride further north, then further still, until they crossed the Neck and Moat Cailin came into sight. Winterfell awaited them, its ancient halls, its cold winds, its memories and ghosts. But it was home, and it was safe in a way the South could never be. For a while they stood there, absorbing the peace of that night sky, letting the crackle of the fire lull them. Neither spoke, for there was no need. They were leaving behind one chapter of uncertainty and stepping into another. The North beckoned, and they would answer, together.